Hello everyone. I am your storyteller, here to walk you through a tale of fear, mystery, and the unspeakable. I know, many of you choose videos like this to help you drift off to sleep. But before the darkness truly sets in, give me a like and subscribe. I truly appreciate your time and support. Now, tell me, where are you listening? Is it quiet where you are? What time is it, and is the silence really peaceful? Sit down, take a deep breath, and prepare yourself. Because tonight's silence, it's unlike any silence you've ever known. From the moment I stepped out of my car, something was wrong. The silence here wasn't peaceful. It pressed against my eardrums like thick cotton soaked in fear, a suffocating stillness that no natural quiet ever carries. The isolation I'd craved for my writing retreat twisted into a malevolent force, an invisible weight of unseen eyes lurking just beyond the tree line. The cottage had promised sanctuary, remote enough to escape the city's chaos, yet not so far that I'd lose myself completely. Yet, standing on the overgrown driveway, the laptop bag heavy on my shoulder, I questioned if I had instead invited a nightmare. The owner's voice on the phone had crackled like static from an ancient line. He'd been oddly vague, brushing off my questions about why previous tenants abandoned the place early. The keys are under a loose stone by the door. Stay as long as you need, he'd said, no offer to meet in person. I should have insisted. But curiosity drove me forward. The house itself was a relic, 2 stories of faded clapboard siding, shutters hanging crookedly like the fading grin of a ghost. Ivy crawled up one wall in thick, dark veins, and several windows stared blankly, cataract clouded, as if watching me from the beyond. When I unlocked the front door, the first thing that hit me was the smell, a sickly sweet stench like flowers left to rot in still water. Inside, dust motes danced lazily in shafts of fading sunlight struggling through grime-smeared glass. The furniture was shrouded in sheets, ghostly white drapes barely hiding worn leather and threadbare fabric, as if the house had been holding its breath, waiting. I spent the day unpacking in silence. The Wi-Fi was weak, perfect for forcing me into focus, but the oppressive quiet seemed to seep from the very walls, a living thing that crawled under my skin. It was when I stepped into the backyard that my unease sharpened. There, about 20 feet from the house, stood the well, an ancient stone mouth frozen in a screen. The circular structure rose 4 feet high, capped by a crude wooden cover nailed shut in a desperate X, boards layered atop boards as if to trap whatever lurked below. The stones were slick with moss and age, cold and slimy beneath my fingers. Twisted symbols were etched into several of them, neither letters nor numbers, shifting shape whenever my eyes dared to glance away. The wooden cover creaked softly in the evening wind, a sound like bones settling deep beneath the earth. I told myself it was just an old well, sealed for safety. But the air around it was colder, unnatural, and carried a smell that was organic yet wrong, like spoiled milk baking under a cruel sun. That first night, I sat down to write, hoping the retreat would dissolve my creative block. But no matter how hard I focused, my gaze kept wandering to the back windows, to that dark, ominous well silhouetted under the moonlight. Then came the scratching. Around midnight, a soft, deliberate scratch, scratch, pause, scratch, scratch, pause. Not random. Not the whim of a restless animal. It was a rhythm, a pattern, as if something beneath was clawing to escape its prison. I froze, heart pounding as the sound grew louder, more urgent. A cold draft curled around my neck as I lay in bed, the weight of the house pressing down, whispering secrets I dared not understand. Was I alone here? Or was the cottage waiting for me, to be its next tenant to vanish? As the nights wore on, the scratching turned to scraping. Faint whispers, barely audible, echoed through the walls. Shadows flickered beyond the windows. The well seemed to breathe, a slow, sinister pulse that stirred the air. One evening, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't explain, I crept to the well. My fingers brushed the wooden cover. A shiver ran through me as the symbols on the stones glowed faintly, pulsing with an eerie, otherworldly light. Then, from deep within, a low, guttural growl rolled upward, shaking the ground beneath my feet. I stumbled back, heart racing. The house was no longer a refuge. It was a trap. The next morning, I discovered scratch marks on the kitchen floor, deep, ragged lines that hadn't been there before. The scent of decay thickened, seeping through every corner. Sleep fled from me. And then, the dreams began. In those dreams, the well opened like a maw, swallowing the moonlight. From its depths, ghostly hands reached up, claws scraping stone, begging for release. A voice, hollow and desperate, whispered my name. I tried to leave. Packed my bags. But the front door wouldn't budge. The windows were sealed tight as if the house itself had become a living cage. Desperation turned to terror. In the stillness, I began to hear footsteps, not my own, but others pacing the empty halls. Cold breath on my neck. The faint sound of laughter, warped and broken. I am trapped with something ancient. Something hungry. Something that has waited too long. So I speak to you now from this haunted place, a warning cloaked in shadows. Some silences are screams in disguise. Some places breathe with secrets darker than the night itself. Stay with me. Watch carefully. And listen, very closely. Because the scratching never truly stops. It's only waiting for you to hear it. My heart hammered fiercely against my ribs as the sound emerged unmistakably from outside, the direction of the well. I pressed my face to the bedroom window, cupping my hands around my eyes to block out my own reflection. The backyard was bathed in cold, pale moonlight, the shadows stretching long and dark across the tangled, overgrown grass. The well sat at the center of a circle of newer darkness, the wooden cover almost invisible, but I could hear it clearly now. The steady scraping of something clawing against stone, echoing up from a place far beneath the earth. The sound twisted inside me, making my teeth ache and sending cold tendrils crawling slowly up my spine. Whatever was trapped down there, it was desperately trying to escape. Sleep became impossible. I paced the bedroom floor, bare feet soft against the worn hardwood, the scratching beneath relentless. Sometimes it would pause for long minutes, leaving behind a suffocating silence so heavy I almost convinced myself it was all in my mind. Then it would begin again, frantic and urgent, scrape, 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 and my pulse would spike with renewed terror. By 3 a.m., the restless curiosity overtook my fear. I had to know what was making that sound. I crept down the stairs, heart hammering, and slipped out the back door. The night air was cold and sharp against my skin, raising goosebumps along my arms and legs. The scratching grew louder as I neared the well, joined now by faint whispers, too soft to make out words but carrying the rhythm of urgent, desperate conversation. My hands trembled as I examined the wooden cover. The boards were old but solid, held firmly in place by rusty nails sunk deep into the cold stone rim. Yet at the edges, where wood met stone, thin gaps appeared, narrow cracks of absolute darkness, pulsing as if alive with malevolent intent. A thin stream of mist seeped through one of these gaps, not steam, but something darker, blue-tinged and softly luminescent under the moonlight. It curled upward like grasping fingers before slowly dissipating into the cold night air. The moment I saw it, the whispering sharpened. Not into words, but into something deeper, an assault on my mind itself. Images flashed behind my closed eyes, snatches of memories lost or stolen, a tarnished silver locket holding a woman's faded photograph, a tiny toy soldier with chipped paint, a leather-bound journal filled with spidery, hurried handwriting. Beneath these images, a desperate hunger lurked, a profound need that clenched my chest in sympathetic pain. They wanted something back. Something taken. Something hidden and forgotten. And somehow, impossibly, they knew I could help retrieve it. I stumbled backward, my heartbeat roaring in my ears. But the mist followed, tendrils of blue light twisting around my ankles like ghostly shackles, cold and unyielding. The whispers intensified, flooding my mind with new visions, the interior of the house, rooms I had yet to explore, hidden spaces behind walls, forgotten crawl spaces beneath floorboards. Whatever they sought was inside this house. Panic flared, and I ran back inside, slamming the door hard and throwing the deadbolt into place. But even behind locked doors, I could feel them pressing, against the windows, the walls, their longing radiating like fevered heat in the cold night. The whispers seeped through the silence, echoing in empty rooms, crawling beneath my skin. The next hours passed in a haze of terror and compulsive need. I moved through the house like a sleepwalker, fingers tracing surfaces and corners while my conscious mind screamed for me to stop. In the basement, behind a loose stone in the foundation, my fingers found the edge of something wrapped in oiled cloth. I pulled it free. Inside lay the tarnished silver locket from the vision. The photograph inside showed a young woman with sad, knowing eyes that seemed to plead silently. But the locket was only the beginning. Throughout the house, hidden objects emerged, each exactly as the images had revealed. The chipped toy soldier, tucked behind a rafter in the attic. The leather-bound journal, locked in a rusted metal box beneath the kitchen floorboards. Dozens of personal items, each radiating the same aching desperation I had felt from the well. Someone had gathered these things, perhaps stolen them, or simply failed to return them to their rightful owners. And now, those owners, or what remained of them, wanted their possessions back. The weight of those forgotten things pressed down on me, heavier than their physical forms should allow. I sat on the cold basement floor, clutching the locket, and the silence seemed to thicken around me. The house no longer felt like a refuge but a vessel for memories that refused to rest. As I held the locket closer, a faint warmth seeped through the tarnished silver, a pulse, subtle but unmistakable, like a heartbeat beneath the cold metal. Suddenly, the air shifted. The basement lights flickered, casting long shadows that danced against the stone walls. A whisper rose again, closer this time, wrapping around me like a cold breath on my neck. The voice was female, soft, mournful, barely audible, but unmistakable. "Help us." I spun around, heart pounding, searching the darkness. The basement was empty, yet the presence was undeniable. Goosebumps erupted over my skin as the temperature dropped sharply, my breath visible in the frigid air. Driven by a mix of dread and curiosity, I rose slowly and moved toward the stairs. As I ascended, each creak of the wooden steps echoed like a scream in the quiet house. In the dim light of the kitchen, I felt a sudden sharp pain in my chest, as if unseen fingers gripped my heart tightly. The journal beckoned me next. I carried the locked metal box into the living room and pried it open with trembling hands. The pages inside were yellowed and brittle, filled with hurried scrawls in a language that twisted and writhed on the page, symbols, runes, and words that seemed to shift when I looked away. One passage caught my eye, a desperate plea from a woman named Eliza, begging for forgiveness and recounting how her family had been torn apart by greed and betrayal. She spoke of a curse placed on their home, a binding of spirits to the land that fed on their sorrow and longing. The house wasn't just haunted. It was a prison. And I was its newest prisoner. That night, I barely slept. The scratching returned, louder and more frantic. Shadows moved in the corners of my vision, and whispers followed me room to room. I awoke to find small objects from the house rearranged, tokens placed on windowsills, symbols carved faintly into the walls with something dark and sticky. Fear gnawed at me, but I knew I had to uncover the truth. The next day, I searched the attic. Hidden beneath loose floorboards, I found a collection of photographs, faces pale and worn, eyes hollow and accusing. Family portraits twisted by time and sorrow. Among them was a map, crudely drawn, marking places around the property, secret rooms, hidden wells, and forgotten graves. With every discovery, the house seemed to pulse with growing hunger. That evening, as twilight bled into darkness, I heard footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate. I turned sharply, but no one was there. The air grew thick with anticipation, the boundary between past and present blurring like smoke. Something was watching. Waiting. And it knew I was listening. With quiet steps and a trembling hand, I ventured toward the heart of the house, where the map had marked a hidden door behind the living room's peeling wallpaper. The room was suffused with an unnatural cold, as if the air itself was thick with memories too heavy to bear. Slowly peeling back the faded paper, my fingers brushed against rough wood, an outline of a door, nearly invisible to the untrained eye. My breath caught as I pushed it open. A narrow, dust-choked passage stretched into darkness, the faint scent of earth and decay curling around me. The beam of my flashlight flickered as I stepped inside, the walls closing in like the cold embrace of forgotten time. Every step echoed with the whispered names of those trapped here, voices of sorrow and anger, longing and despair. Shadows moved just beyond the light, reaching, grasping, but never quite touching. The deeper I went, the heavier the silence grew, until it was a weight pressing down on my very soul. At the passage's end, a small chamber opened, filled with relics, children's toys, broken jewelry, brittle letters, and in the center, an ancient, cracked mirror. Its surface rippled as if alive, reflecting not my face but scenes from a past long buried, a family torn apart by greed, a mother's desperate tears, a child's fading laughter swallowed by darkness. Suddenly, the temperature dropped further. The whispers rose to a chorus, a mournful hymn of lost souls pleading for release. I felt the presence close, cold hands on my shoulders, voices breathing in my ear. Help us, find what was taken. My heart thundered, fear and compassion warring within me. I knew then that this house was not just a prison, but a keeper of secrets, secrets that I had been chosen to uncover, to set free. But the deeper truth was darker still. The well in the backyard was no mere relic. It was a gateway, a wound in the earth through which the past bled into the present. The things trapped beneath clawed not only at wood and stone but at the veil between worlds. And they would not rest until their stories were told, their belongings returned, and their pain acknowledged. As I stepped back into the passage, determination stealing my trembling limbs, I realized the journey had only just begun. The house was alive, with memory, with grief, with restless shadows. And I was its reluctant keeper now. With a steadying breath, I turned from the chamber of memories, my mind racing with the weight of what I'd just witnessed. The house no longer felt like just wood and stone, it breathed with the sorrow of those lost souls, and each whisper, each shadow was a plea wrapped in darkness. As I retraced my steps through the narrow passage, the beam of my flashlight caught something etched faintly into the damp wall, a symbol, twisted and ancient, that pulsed with an eerie light. It was a mark of binding, a seal meant to keep something trapped, but also a warning: some doors, once open, cannot be closed. Back in the kitchen, the air had grown colder still. The journal lay open on the table, its pages fluttering despite the absence of wind. The inked words seemed to rearrange themselves before my eyes, revealing fragments of a curse placed upon the family centuries ago. It spoke of betrayal, of lives stolen in the dark of night, and of a price paid in endless torment. The scratches and whispers were no random hauntings. They were the echoes of a broken covenant, a debt unpaid. And I was the new bearer of this legacy. That night, as the house settled into uneasy silence, I heard it again, the relentless scraping from the well. This time, the sound was joined by a low, guttural growl, vibrating through the ground beneath my feet. I approached the back door with reluctant resolve, heart pounding a frantic rhythm. Outside, the mist seeped thicker now, swirling around the well like restless spirits awakening. The carvings on the stones glowed faintly, their shapes shifting and writhing as if alive. From the darkness beneath the wooden cover, a cold, fetid breath exhaled, chilling me to the bone. A voice, ancient and fractured, whispered from the depths, "Free us." Frozen by fear and fascination, I felt the boundary between worlds thin, the house itself a threshold between the living and the lost. As the night deepened, I knew there was no turning back. The secrets buried here demanded to be unearthed, the restless souls longed for peace, and the truth waiting to be uncovered was darker and more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. With the cold whisper still echoing in my ears, I stepped closer to the well. The mist twisted around my legs, cold and clammy, like the fingers of unseen hands pulling at my skin. I forced myself to look down past the wooden cover, where darkness pooled like a bottomless void. Then, as if answering some unspoken plea, the boards groaned and shifted. A narrow crack appeared, widening slowly to reveal a glimpse of something lurking just beyond sight. Eyes, glowing faintly with a sickly pale light, blinked open in the abyss, staring up at me with ancient hunger. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, breath ragged. The ground beneath me seemed to pulse, alive with the restless energy of those trapped below. A chorus of voices rose in a terrible crescendo, chanting in a language I could neither understand nor escape. Fear threatened to consume me, but beneath it burned a flicker of resolve. These souls, bound by betrayal and forgotten grief, were crying out for justice, for release. And if I wanted to survive this nightmare, I had to unravel the dark past that chained them here. Returning to the house, I gathered the scattered relics, the locket, the toy soldier, the journal, holding them like fragile keys to a long-locked door. The walls seemed to lean in, shadows pressing closer, as if eager to witness what I might uncover next. In the flickering candlelight, I pored over the journal once more. The writings revealed a family torn apart by greed, dark rituals, and a curse that fed on their sorrow. Names were scratched out, dates blurred, but one truth remained clear: the well was a gateway, a prison, and a curse all at once. Outside, the scratching never ceased. The house breathed, pulsed, and whispered its dark secrets, drawing me deeper into the heart of its torment. I knew then that the night was far from over, and the true horror was only beginning. The blue mist had followed me inside, slipping silently through cracks in the windows and sneaking beneath the doors. It curled in the corners and drifted across the ceiling like a living breath, chilling the air wherever it touched. My breath came out in small, visible puffs, and frost began to bloom on the inside of the windows. But it wasn't just the cold that sent shivers down my spine. The whispers had grown clearer, more urgent, threading through the mist like a woven warning. Dawn was coming, I realized, and if I didn't return their belongings to the well before the first light, something terrible would come to pass. What exactly that consequence was, I couldn't say. But the fear radiating from the mist told me everything I needed to know. My hands trembled as I gathered the items into a canvas bag, each object heavier than it should have been, burdened with years of separation and sorrow. The locket burned against my palm like shards of ice, and the toy soldier seemed almost alive, its tiny painted face turning up toward me in mute accusation. Outside, the well waited like a patient beast. Its wooden cover, loosened during the night, sagged at odd angles, exposing an abyss of perfect blackness beneath. The beam of my phone barely penetrated a few feet, but I could hear movement, no longer frantic scratching, but a soft susurrus, like wind rustling dry leaves or fabric brushing against stone. I approached the edge, heart hammering, every instinct screaming at me to flee. But the blue mist swirled thick around my legs, no longer desperate but tinged with gratitude. These things belonged here. The cycle demanded completion. One by one, I dropped the stolen relics into the darkness. The locket fell with a tiny splash, as though landing in water far below. The toy soldier tumbled end over end before vanishing into the void. The journal fluttered like a dying bird before shadows swallowed it whole. With each offering, the whispers softened, grew more content, as the blue mist sank slowly back through the gaps in the wood, flowing down into the depths like smoke drawn back into a flame. The chill began to lift, and the oppressive weight pressing on my chest all night finally eased. But as I turned to leave, one last whisper slipped through the cooling air, clearer and more deliberate than all before, a voice that might have belonged to the woman in the locket. "Thank you," it breathed. "But he knows you've been here. He knows what you've done." Ice flooded my veins. The man who had rented me this place, who had kept his distance, avoided meeting me, he had known about the well, the hidden items, the restless spirits. Somehow, he had known someone like me would come, someone curious and compassionate enough to undo his secret collection. I had been bait. Used. And now, he would discover that his carefully hoarded treasures had been found and released. Dawn's pale light spilled across the driveway as I scrambled into my car, hands shaking so violently I struggled to grip the wheel. The house looked different in daylight, not merely old or worn, but malevolent, like a predator momentarily sated but already hungry for the next catch. As I pulled away, my eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, catching a final glimpse of the well. The wooden cover had collapsed entirely, leaving the opening bare. But instead of the endless black void, I saw only ordinary stone and shadow, the familiar depths of an old water well, nothing more. The whispers were gone. The blue mist vanished. Yet I knew with chilling certainty that this was far from over. The owner would return. He would discover what had transpired, and his collecting would begin anew. Other renters, other curious souls, would stumble upon his secrets and be drawn into the cycle. And elsewhere, in other shadowed places, other voices would stir, whispering desperate pleas into the night. I drove until the sun rose high and the day grew hot, hoping to leave the terrible cold, the aching fear, behind. But in my bones, I knew the darkness was waiting. And it was patient. But even now, weeks later, I sometimes wake in the middle of the night with the taste of frost on my tongue and the echo of grateful whispers still lingering in my ears. The manuscript I had hoped to finish remains untouched. Some stories, I have learned, are better left unwritten, better left to fade into silence. Story 2, The Basement Record. The basement smelled of mildew and decades-old dust, a familiar mustiness that clung to the air like a forgotten memory. But beneath that recognizable scent lurked something else. Something intangible, a subtle rot that made my nostrils flare in inexplicable dread. A single bare bulb cast sickly yellow light across rows of vinyl records. Their spines formed a labyrinth of shadows that seemed to shift just beyond the edge of my vision, as if alive and watching when I wasn't looking directly at them. For 15 years, I had been a collector, hunting estate sales, thrift stores, underground dealers, for rare records that made my pulse quicken with anticipation. Yet, standing in that cramped basement beneath Henderson's Antiques, staring at the unmarked album's sleeve that held only a black vinyl disc, I felt something I'd never felt before, an absolute, bone-deep certainty that I should not take it home. But I bought it anyway. The choice felt disconnected from my rational mind, as if my hand had moved of its own accord when I pressed a $20 bill into Henderson's grimy palm. He didn't meet my eyes, merely muttering something about it being part of an estate lot acquired from a house upstate. His fingers trembled faintly as he wrapped the record in brown paper, a tremble that should have warned me. That evening, my apartment felt different. The comfort of my listening room, with walls lined in neat rows of cherished albums and my vintage turntable gleaming under soft lamplight, seemed diminished, as though a shadow had fallen across its familiar glow. Even my cat, Pricks, normally a creature of warmth and affection, shunned me, retreating beneath the couch. His yellow eyes caught the light like twin warning beacons, fixed and unblinking. With reverence reserved for the most precious finds, I unwrapped the record, hands shaking more than usual. The vinyl was pristine, impossibly so, as if it had never been played. No label adorned its center, only smooth, obsidian black plastic that seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. Its weight felt wrong, heavier than any record should be, as if something dense and unknowable had been pressed into its grooves alongside the music. The first time I played it, nothing happened, nothing but static. But this was no ordinary static. It wasn't the warm crackle of vintage vinyl or the gentle hiss of analog recording. It was aggressive, purposeful, a white noise that seemed to possess consciousness and malevolent intent. I adjusted tracking, cleaned the stylus, checked every connection in my meticulously maintained system. The static persisted, filling my apartment with a sound that made my teeth ache and skin crawl. And yet I could not stop listening. Night after night, I returned to that record. Slowly, patterns emerged beneath the chaotic hiss, subtle rhythms, faint voices just below the threshold of comprehension. I leaned close to the speakers, straining to decipher meaning until my eyes watered and temples throbbed. On the fourth night, the static broke, my name surfaced. It emerged like a drowning person breaking the surface, desperate and gasping, undeniably real. A voice I did not recognize, yet somehow knew intimately, spoke it. The shock sent me reeling backward, my chair toppled as I lunged to lift the needle. But the voice did not cease. It echoed in my head even after the stylus left the groove. My throat tightened as realization dawned. The voice was now inside my mind. Or perhaps it had been there all along. It was dry and papery, like autumn leaves scraping concrete, whispering with painful clarity secrets I had never shared. Childhood confessions. Humiliations from high school. The true reason I quit my job 3 years ago, the lie I fed everyone. Sleep fled me. Every time I closed my eyes, the voice returned, recounting episodes with forensic precision. It knew about the $20 I stole from my mother's purse when I was 12. Each night, the voice grew clearer, more relentless. It spoke not only of my past mistakes but of things I'd buried deep, secrets I didn't even fully understand myself. Memories I had repressed clawed their way back, jagged and raw. The voice whispered names I had long forgotten, places I had never dared revisit, faces blurred by time but somehow familiar in the flickering darkness of my mind. My grip on reality began to fray. The static on the record no longer confined itself to my listening room. It seeped into the walls, into the corners of my apartment, filling the silence with a suffocating presence. Sometimes, when the needle lifted, a cold breeze brushed my neck as if unseen hands hovered just out of sight. Crix, my usually affectionate companion, became a sentinel of unease. He refused to enter the room when the record played, growling low and arching his back, his yellow eyes wide with primal fear. Once, I found him staring fixedly at an empty corner, his fur bristling, before he bolted and hid for hours. Desperation gnawed at me. I tried to rid myself of the record. I wrapped it carefully, sealed it in a box, and locked it away. But each morning it returned to the turntable, waiting patiently, as if the house itself demanded its presence. One night, exhausted and terrified, I dreamt of a vast, shadowed auditorium. Rows of faceless figures sat in silence, their eyes fixed on a stage bathed in sickly yellow light. From the darkness came a voice, the same voice from the record, calling my name, beckoning me to join the audience. I woke drenched in sweat, heart pounding, the faint echo of applause still ringing in my ears. The line between nightmare and waking blurred. Unable to resist, I lowered the needle once more. Beneath the static, a melody emerged, discordant and haunting, a song of loss and longing, sung in a language older than time. The music twisted through my soul, unraveling my defenses, exposing every secret wound. And then, unmistakably, the voice whispered. You cannot hide. The record knows. The nights grew longer, heavier, as the record's haunting song wrapped around me like a shroud. Each crackle and hiss carried whispers not only of my past but of something far older, an ancient lament that seeped from the vinyl's grooves, echoing in the corners of my soul. My apartment transformed into a stage set for a tragedy I had not auditioned for. Shadows lengthened beyond their bounds, pooling thick and slow in the corners like ink spilled on pale paper. The walls themselves seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with each agonized note that poured from the speakers. Crix became a creature of alertness and dread, refusing to enter the room, his fur standing on end, his eyes glowing with a fearful intelligence. One night, I found him perched on the windowsill, staring out into the blackness beyond with a fixity that chilled me more than the cold autumn air. Sleep was a distant memory. The voice inside my head grew louder, more insistent, threading through my dreams and waking hours alike. It recounted forgotten sins and fractured moments with a relentless precision that left me raw and exposed. One evening, as rain hammered against the windows, the static shifted suddenly, a silence so complete it pressed against my ears like a physical weight. Then, a single phrase broke the stillness, whispered through the crackling speakers. Face what was lost. Compelled beyond reason, I followed the command. I traced the origins of the record, piecing together a fractured history that led me far beyond my city apartment, into crumbling estates, forgotten archives, and conversations with those who dared not speak its name. The record was not merely cursed, it was a vessel, an archive of sorrow and secrets recorded by a soul trapped between worlds, longing for release. The culmination awaited in a forgotten manor on the edge of a cold forest, where the boundary between the living and the dead thinned like mist. Standing before the manor's iron gates, thunder rolling overhead, I felt the culmination of dread and hope intertwined. This was the moment to confront the darkness, to unearth the truth buried beneath layers of time and silence. Inside, the air was thick with dust and memories. The walls whispered the stories of lives shattered, promises broken, and songs silenced. In the manor's grand parlor, a phonograph sat beneath a fractured portrait, a woman's face blurred by age and tears. Placing the record onto the turntable, I lowered the needle. The room filled with the spectral melody, and shadows began to stir. And then, in the flickering candlelight, she appeared. A figure woven from sorrow and song, eyes hollow yet burning with ancient pain. The voice was hers, the voice in the record, the voice in my mind. She reached toward me, longing for release, for remembrance. The climax surged as I faced the weight of forgotten sins and the fragile hope of redemption. Would I break the cycle, or be swallowed by it forever? The woman's form shimmered like a heat haze, fragile yet impossibly real. Her eyes, dark pools of grief and longing, locked onto mine, and the room seemed to hold its breath. The cracked portrait behind her echoed her sorrow, a silent testament to a story never fully told. The haunting melody wrapped tighter around us, notes rising and falling like the pulse of a broken heart. Shadows flickered along the walls, coalescing into shapes, faces twisted in anguish, hands reaching, grasping for a salvation long denied. She stepped forward, the air growing colder, each breath a mist swirling between us. Her voice, soft and mournful, wove through the music. "You carry the weight of memories not your own," she whispered. "The record chose you, because you listen. Because you remember." I felt the weight of years pressing down, the stories of lives stolen by time and silence flooding my mind. Images flashed, laughter cut short, promises shattered beneath moonlight, tears shed in rooms now empty. Trembling, I reached out, my fingers brushing the translucent veil of her presence. A cold seeped into my skin, sharp, biting, yet beneath it, a fragile warmth pulsed, fragile as a fragile hope. "You must set us free," she implored. "Restore what was lost, and break the chain." In that moment, I understood. The record was not a curse but a key, a call to remember, to heal wounds carved deep into the fabric of time. Summoning every ounce of courage, I vowed to carry their stories beyond the static, beyond the silence. The melody swelled, and with it, the shadows receded, faces softening into peace. The woman smiled, a faint, radiant curve, and slowly faded like dawn's first light. The room warmed as the last notes played out, the weight lifting from my chest. The record spun to silence, its grooves smooth and empty, a vessel emptied of sorrow. I knew the journey was not over, not entirely, but the darkest night had passed. Outside, the rain eased, and a quiet dawn whispered promises of healing and remembrance. The air in the room hung thick and cold, heavy with the weight of unseen eyes. The shadows shifted around me, no longer hostile but expectant, like a jury waiting for confession. I stood trembling, the record's haunting static fading into silence as I faced the spectral assembly. "I see you," I whispered, voice barely more than breath. "I see everything you've shown me. The lies I told, the pain I caused, not just to others, but to myself." The shadows pulsed gently, as if my words soothed a raw wound long left to fester in the dark. "I was afraid," I continued, voice cracking. "Afraid of facing the truth. Afraid of being judged. But I can't run anymore." A shiver rippled through the room, not from cold but from a fragile shift, something breaking free. The voices softened, the accusing roar diminished to a steady murmur. Faces formed in the darkness, some anguished, some sorrowful, others hinting at forgiveness. "I don't expect to be free of this burden tonight," I confessed. "But I want to start. To carry these truths honestly. To heal. The room seemed to breathe with me, shadows dissolving into pools of light, the oppressive weight lifting gently from my chest. The record lay silent on the turntable, no longer a prison but a relic emptied of its torment. In that fragile peace, I understood that the haunting had never been from beyond, but from within. From a conscience long ignored, demanding reckoning. And in facing it, I found the first step toward redemption. The brass key felt unnaturally heavy in my palm, the kind of weight that presses not on your hand, but deep inside your chest. Mrs. Blackwood had pressed it there 3 days ago, her voice tinged with a tremor she tried to hide. "The Rosemore estate needs a caretaker while we're away," she said. 6 weeks, no more. She smiled politely, but I caught something beneath the surface, a hint of dread, or perhaps warning. The pay was generous, far more than I expected for a gardener. It should have made me suspicious. But I needed the money, and tending to an old garden seemed almost peaceful compared to the suburban lawns I was used to. The estate itself sat at the end of a twisting gravel road, hemmed in by towering oaks that stood like sentinels, blocking the world beyond. The house was a Victorian monstrosity, dark stone walls twisted by age, wrought iron gates curling like claws, and windows that seemed to watch with cold indifference. Yet it was the garden that stole my breath. Acres of manicured flower beds spilled out in patterns so intricate they seemed designed to confuse or trap. Stone pathways wound between lush greenery, and scattered throughout stood marble statues, silent, eternal watchers. Roman gods, mythical beasts, cherubs frozen in mid-play, and ladies draped in flowing gowns, all carved with such exquisite detail that I found myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to catch a flicker of movement. Mrs. Blackwood had mentioned the statues dated back to the estate's first owner in the 1890s. She'd spoken with a slight shake in her voice, which I dismissed as the frailty of age. But now, walking among these silent figures, I wondered if her unease ran deeper. The first day was uneventful. I pruned roses, deadhead perennials, and tested the irrigation. The rhythm of the work soothed me. Yet an odd sensation lingered, like invisible eyes tracking my every move. Each time I turned, only marble faces stared blankly ahead. Late afternoon brought the first true chill of unease. Passing by the statue of a young woman clad in classical drapery, I swore she had been facing the fountain when I walked past earlier, but now she stood looking directly at me. I blinked, heart skipping. It was impossible, yet undeniable. The silent garden had begun to shift, and I was the only one who noticed. The sun hung low, its golden light slanting through the oaks and casting long shadows that tangled with the stone pathways. I stopped dead in my tracks, eyes fixed on the statue's impossibly lifelike gaze. For a moment, I convinced myself it was a trick of the light, a shadow shifting with the breeze. But as I stepped closer, that delicate marble hand, once poised gracefully at her side, now rested on the rim of the fountain, as if she had moved silently in the space between my glances. A shiver traced my spine. The garden, so meticulously ordered, felt suddenly alive with a secret heartbeat. The air thickened, the scent of damp earth mingling with something else, something faintly metallic and stale, like the whisper of forgotten memories. I glanced around, half expecting to find someone playing a cruel prank, but the estate was utterly silent. No rustling leaves, no distant footsteps, nothing but the steady drip of water from the fountain. That night, I lay awake listening to the house creak and sigh around me. The weight of the key rested heavy on my bedside table, a cold reminder of the strange day. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting. When morning came, I resolved to dismiss my fears as imagination, the product of solitude and fatigue. But as I stepped into the garden, the statues seemed to regard me with renewed intensity, their eyes glinting faintly in the morning sun. Hours later, as I pruned a particularly thorny rose bush near the edge of the labyrinthine maze, I heard a soft, almost imperceptible whisper carried on the breeze. The words were too faint to understand, but the tone was urgent, pleading. Drawn deeper into the maze, the paths twisted and turned with uncanny complexity. The air grew cooler, and the oppressive silence thickened. Statues loomed on all sides, guardians or prisoners, I could no longer tell. At the heart of the maze stood a statue unlike the others, a figure cloaked in shadow, face obscured by a hood. Its presence was a void, absorbing light and hope alike. As I approached, the whispers rose into a chorus, and the garden seemed to hold its breath. The boundary between stone and flesh blurred, and I knew that the garden's secrets were far darker than I had imagined. The shadowed statue at the heart of the maze loomed over me like a sentinel from a nightmare, its hooded form absorbing the pale light, casting an unnatural darkness that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The air grew heavy, thick with a silence so complete it roared in my ears. My breath came shallow and quick as I stepped closer, every instinct screaming to turn away, yet I was rooted to the spot by something older and darker than fear. Whispers swirled around me, soft, fragmented voices rising and falling like a mournful wind threading through the branches overhead. They spoke in a tongue I couldn't understand, yet their tone was unmistakable, desperation, sorrow, and something that felt like a warning. As my hand reached out, trembling, to touch the cold stone surface, the garden seemed to shift beneath my feet. The statues lining the maze stirred imperceptibly, their carved eyes narrowing, and for a fleeting second, I saw movement, subtle, fluid, as if shadows themselves breathed. A sudden gust of wind swept through the maze, carrying with it the sharp scent of decay and forgotten grief. The hooded figure's hand lifted slowly, pointing toward the distant house, where a single window glowed faintly against the gathering dusk. I turned, compelled by a force I did not understand, and hurried toward the house. The statue's silent gazes followed me, the oppressive weight of their presence lingering in the air like a promise, or a threat. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with dust and the echoes of lives long past. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet as I moved through dimly lit corridors, drawn toward the source of the light. In the parlor, an ancient music box sat atop a carved oak table, its delicate tune threading through the silence with a haunting clarity. As I lifted the lid, a folded letter slipped from beneath the mechanism, yellowed and fragile. With shaking hands, I unfolded it. The handwriting was elegant but hurried, words soaked in sorrow. To whoever finds this, know that the garden watches, and the statues remember. We were bound by love and betrayal, by secrets too heavy to bear. The shadow in the maze is not merely stone but a guardian, a curse, and a plea. Set us free before the roses wither and the night swallows all. A chill seeped through me. The terror that lived between what I thought I saw and what I knew I had seen was no longer confined to the garden. It had followed me inside, woven into the very walls of Rosemore Estate. The clock chimed midnight. Outside, the statues seemed to lean just a little closer. The clock's final chime echoed through the silent house, a somber toll that seemed to mark the threshold between the known and the unknowable. Shadows stretched and twisted along the walls, thickening like ink spilled in water, and the air grew colder, each breath visible as a ghostly mist. I clutched the letter tightly, heart pounding, as the oppressive stillness was shattered by a faint creak from the floor above. Step by deliberate step, footsteps descended the staircase, slow and measured, but carrying a weight that pressed deep into my bones. The light from the parlor flickered, the candle flame guttering as a figure emerged from the gloom, tall, cloaked in darkness, face hidden beneath a hood much like the statue in the maze. A voice, low and resonant, broke the silence. "You have come far, caretaker. But the garden's secrets demand more than tending." My legs trembled, yet I stood firm, the letter still clenched like a talisman. "What do you want from me?" The figure paused, then gestured toward the window. Beyond, the statues stood sentinel, their marble eyes gleaming faintly in the moonlight. They remember the betrayals. The love lost. The blood spilled beneath these ancient oaks. They seek release, redemption, or vengeance. A sudden wind burst through the open window, carrying a chorus of whispers that swelled to a deafening crescendo. The statues outside shifted, some turning, others tilting their heads, as if alive with a terrible purpose. "I must break the curse," I whispered, voice barely audible over the rising storm. The figure nodded solemnly. The key you hold is not just brass, but a symbol, a promise made long ago. To free the garden, you must face what lies buried in the earth beneath the oldest rose bush, the heart of the estate's sorrow. Gathering my courage, I stepped toward the door, the storm outside roaring to life. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the path through the twisting garden maze. The statue's silent watch followed me as I hurried through the rain-slicked stone paths. Reaching the ancient rose bush, its thorny branches clawing at the storm, I knelt and began to dig with bare hands, cold mud clinging to my skin. As my fingers struck something hard, a sudden roar filled the night, a sound both anguished and furious, rising from deep within the soil. The earth trembled. Shadows poured forth like smoke, swirling around me in a tempest of grief and rage. With trembling hands, I unearthed a rusted box, its surface etched with the same twisted symbols that adorned the statue's hood. Opening it, I found letters, trinkets, and a small vial filled with dark liquid, the remnants of a promise broken, a love betrayed, a life sacrificed. The garden held its breath. I whispered a prayer of release. The shadows writhed, then began to dissolve into the night air. A calm settled over the estate, the first in a century. The statues, now softened in the dawn's light, seemed less like watchers and more like mourners finally at peace. As I rose, the brass key warmed in my hand, a quiet reminder that some gardens are grown not just with soil and sun, but with the tending of truths long buried. They didn't walk or slide. Instead, they seemed to flow, an eerie, impossible motion, as if the very stone was liquefying and reshaping itself with ghostly grace. Limbs stretched and bent with unnatural flexibility, heads tilted and turned, eyes locking onto the mansion's facade with an unwavering focus. The garden transformed into a stage for their silent procession. Statues passed one another with fluid elegance, weaving through flower beds and navigating paths as though guided by some invisible conductor. The air around them hummed with a low vibration, a subtle song that thrummed beneath the rustling leaves and whispered wind. I was frozen in place, breath caught between terror and disbelief. My hands trembled uncontrollably, clutching the windowsill for support. The coldness seeped through the glass, chilling me deeper than the autumn night air ever could. One by one, they advanced toward the mansion's looming front steps, congregating like an audience gathering for a spectral play. The entire garden, once a sanctuary of serene beauty, had become a theater of the uncanny. A sudden crack echoed from the mansion, as if the house itself had exhaled a shudder of recognition. The windows flickered with dim light, casting long, dancing shadows that merged with the statue's own. Then, from the deepest shadow beneath the portico, a figure emerged, draped in a cloak darker than the night itself, face hidden beneath a hood. The statues all turned in unison to face this figure, their marble eyes gleaming with a terrible awareness. The figure lifted a hand, and the garden fell silent, an unnatural stillness that pressed on my chest. A voice, low and resonant, broke the quiet. "You have seen what cannot be unseen," it intoned. "The garden remembers. The statues obey. And the estate demands justice." My heart pounded wildly as the weight of unseen eyes bore down on me. The statues stood motionless once more, but their presence was no longer passive. They were watchers, sentinels, witnesses to a history steeped in betrayal and pain. I realized then that my arrival had awakened something ancient, a restless force woven into the very stones and soil of Rosemore Estate. And whatever awaited me inside that mansion was the heart of the secret, the source of the garden's sorrow and the key to its release. The figure's voice lingered in the air like a cold wind, wrapping around me, seeping into my bones. I swallowed hard, every muscle tense as I stepped away from the window, my breath shallow and uneven. I had no choice but to face the mansion, the source of this ancient sorrow. The front door, massive and carved with ornate symbols, creaked open before I could reach it, as if inviting me inside or daring me to refuse. Inside, the air was thick with dust and memories, the scent of old wood and faded grandeur mingling with something darker, like the faintest trace of decay. The grand foyer stretched before me, its marble floor cracked, chandeliers swaying gently despite the stillness. Portraits lined the walls, eyes seeming to follow my every move. With each step, the temperature dropped. Shadows stretched unnaturally, flickering at the edge of my vision. The house breathed, a living thing, waiting. Ahead, a spiral staircase curled upward, disappearing into darkness. But it was the doorway to the library that drew me, an archway framed by carved roses, the symbol of the estate's tortured legacy. Inside, rows of ancient books lined towering shelves, but what caught my eye was a desk strewn with papers, letters yellowed with age, a leather-bound journal open to a hastily scrawled page. I moved closer, reading words penned in trembling script, a confession of love and betrayal, a pact made in desperation, and a curse unleashed upon the estate and all who dwelled within. Suddenly, the room chilled further. The shadows coalesced into forms, phantoms of the past, translucent and mournful, replaying moments of passion, jealousy, and tragic loss. I realized then, the garden statues were not just stone. They were remnants of souls trapped by the curse, condemned to silent watchfulness until justice was served. A voice whispered through the room, barely audible but filled with aching sorrow, "Will you be the one to break the silence?" I felt the weight of those words settle deep within me, a summons I could neither deny nor fully understand. The phantoms swirled gently around the room, their translucent forms flickering like candle flames caught in a draught. Their eyes, full of sorrow and longing, met mine with a silent plea. I took a tentative step forward, my fingers brushing the open journal's pages. The words seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive, revealing fractured fragments of a tragic story, love betrayed, promises shattered, and a desperate bargain struck in the dark. As I read, the room grew colder still, the air thickening with the unspoken grief of lives lost and the weight of a curse that stretched across generations. The phantoms began to form scenes, silent reenactments of a past drenched in pain, a clandestine meeting beneath the rosebushes, whispered threats echoing through hallways, and a shattered locket slipping from trembling hands. A sudden gust rattled the windows, and the figures turned toward the spiral staircase, beckoning me. Heart pounding, I knew the next step lay above, in the shadowed depths of the manor. With every creaking step, the darkness deepened, swallowing the light from my lantern and my hope in equal measure. At the top, a solitary door stood ajar, a faint glow spilling into the gloom. Pushing it open, I found myself in a chamber lined with mirrors, their surfaces cracked and fogged. In the center, a figure sat, a woman draped in faded silk, her eyes pools of endless sorrow. She rose slowly, her voice a trembling whisper that resonated with the very walls. "You have heard the garden's cries. Will you now carry their burden? Will you break the cycle and free us from this eternal watch?" I met her gaze, feeling the heavy weight of her question settle on my soul. The silence between what I thought I saw and what I knew I had seen had led me here, to a choice that could unbind the past or doom us all to remain trapped in its shadow. The room seemed to hold its breath as I stood before her, the weight of countless generations pressing down like the stone beneath my feet. The woman's eyes searched mine, seeking something, hope, resolve, or perhaps forgiveness. "I don't know if I'm worthy," I whispered, voice trembling. "But I can't leave this pain unspoken. I will do whatever it takes." A faint, sorrowful smile touched her lips. "Then listen well. The curse binds not just those who wronged, but those who forgot. To break it, you must face the truth buried in the heart of the garden." She raised her hand, and the mirrors around us rippled like water, revealing the twisted roots of the ancient rosebush, the source of the estate's dark legacy. Beneath its tangled branches lies the key. But beware, the past guards its secrets fiercely. I stepped forward, determination burning through my fear. The shattered mirrors reflected not only my image but glimpses of those lost souls, their stories etched into the glass, waiting to be heard. The silence between what I thought I saw and what I knew I had seen was no longer a void but a doorway. As I reached out to cross the threshold, the woman's voice echoed softly, "Your journey begins now." The statues didn't walk or slide, they simply moved, gliding silently across grass and stone like spectral pieces on a supernatural chessboard. My breath hitched, shallow and rapid, as I watched their deliberate procession. Slowly, they formed a perfect circle around the cottage, positioning themselves at regular intervals, sentinels enclosing a fortress. One by one, they turned their heads to face my refuge. The moonlight revealed every chiseled detail, delicate lips pressed into stoic lines, flowing robes frozen mid-motion, and hollow eye sockets that seemed to glow with invisible embers. The sensation of their unseeing gaze bore down on me like a physical weight, pressing against my chest with cold insistence. My skin prickled, a visceral certainty told me dozens of marble eyes were fixed on me, watching, waiting. I tried to step back from the window, but my legs betrayed me, weak, trembling, refusing to obey. Cold sweat soaked through my shirt, and my hands shook uncontrollably. Time stretched, the tableau frozen with me huddled inside, the statues standing vigil outside. As dawn's first pale light crept over the eastern horizon, everything shifted. In perfect unison, the statues turned away from the cottage, now facing the dark, looming woods bordering the estate. Their message was clear, it was time to follow. I faced a choice. I could barricade myself inside, waiting desperately for the Blackwood's return and hoping daylight would restore normalcy. Or I could step outside and see what the ancient guardians wished to reveal. Some part of me I didn't recognize, a strange, compelling force, guided my hand to the door handle. Without resistance, I opened it and stepped into the cold pre-dawn air. The statues remained still as I walked among them, but I felt their presence like an electric charge humming in the air. They formed a solemn corridor leading from the cottage to the edge of the woods. Each crunch of gravel underfoot rang unnaturally loud in the heavy silence. I reached the forest's boundary, where the manicured lawn gave way to wild, tangled shadows. Towering oaks formed an impenetrable canopy, swallowing moonlight whole. Yet the statue's collective gaze urged me forward, and with a deep breath, I crossed into the darkness. The path through the woods was faint, an absence of undergrowth here, a worn stone there. My eyes adjusted to the gloom, picking out moss-covered rocks and gnarled roots. And then, more statues, older, weathered by time and moss, stood like forgotten sentinels along the trail. It dawned on me, this was no ordinary garden. The estate sat atop ancient ground. These statues were not mere decorations but guardians, keepers of knowledge predating the mansion's Victorian grandeur by centuries. After what felt like miles, the trail opened to a circular clearing. At its center stood a strange structure, part altar, part sculpture, carved from the same dark stone as the house. Symbols writhed and shifted across its surface, refusing to settle under my gaze. A crushing realization struck me, I was not the first caretaker. This midnight procession, this ritual, had played out countless times before. The statues gathered witnesses like me, drawing them into this otherworldly place to confront visions no human mind was meant to hold. But instead of enlightenment, I felt only displacement, as if I'd stepped outside time and space entirely. The forest pulsed with an alien rhythm, the altar's symbols hypnotizing me with their silent dance. Fear surged, and I stumbled backward, survival instinct pushing me away from the clearing. The journey back was endless. Each step was a battle against a force pulling me back toward the altar's impossible presence. The statues I passed seemed to watch with disappointment, expressions impossibly alive for carved stone. When I finally emerged from the woods, dawn was breaking over the garden, soft light washing over the statues now frozen once again in place, waiting, for what, I did not know. The pale light of dawn spilled gently over the garden, softening the stark shadows that had loomed through the night. The statues stood silent and still once more, frozen in their vigil, their marble faces serene yet holding the weight of countless untold stories. The oppressive chill that had gripped me all night began to ease, replaced by the fragile warmth of morning, but an uneasy tension remained, as if the estate itself exhaled a long-held breath. I stood at the edge of the woods, my heart pounding from the night's ordeal, struggling to make sense of the ritual I had witnessed. The ancient altar, the moving statues, the whispered histories, they all pointed toward a truth far darker and more tangled than I had imagined. This place was more than a garden or a mansion, it was a nexus of sorrow and memory, where the past refused to rest. With reluctant steps, I returned to the cottage, each footfall echoing against the gravel path. The key in my pocket felt heavier than ever, a reminder that I had been drawn into a story far beyond tending roses and pruning hedges. The statue's silent watch seemed to follow me, their unseen eyes burning with expectation. Inside, I poured myself a cup of coffee, hands still trembling. The cottage, though quaint and familiar, now felt like the threshold to something vast and unknowable. As the morning light filtered through the curtains, I resolved to uncover the estate's secrets fully, no longer a passive observer, but an active participant in its unfolding story. I knew the days ahead would be fraught with discovery and danger, that the garden's history held shadows I might never fully escape. But in that moment, amid the quiet hum of morning, I felt the stirrings of courage, a fragile hope that even the darkest curses might be broken by those willing to face them. The first light of dawn did little to calm the restless weight pressing on my chest as I stepped back into the garden. Each statue seemed to watch me more intently now, their silent gazes heavier with unspoken expectation. The carefully pruned roses and sculpted topiaries, once symbols of tranquility, now felt like a carefully woven web, a trap fashioned from centuries of sorrow and secrets. Determined, I began to explore the estate more thoroughly. The old caretaker's journal I'd found in the mansion hinted at a history tangled in betrayal, dark rituals, and a pact that cursed the land. The previous caretakers had disappeared or gone mad, their fates sealed by the garden's ancient will. I sought out the local archives in the nearby town, poring over brittle newspapers and faded letters. The Rosemore estate was once owned by a family consumed by ambition and haunted by tragedy. The first owner, a wealthy industrialist, had lost his wife under mysterious circumstances. Rumors whispered of forbidden ceremonies performed in the garden, attempts to bind her spirit, to keep her from leaving. These rituals, desperate and unnatural, had fractured the very fabric of the estate, anchoring restless souls to its soil. Back at the estate, I returned to the altar in the clearing. The shifting symbols carved into its surface seemed to pulse with energy, reacting to my presence. I traced them carefully, feeling a strange warmth amid the chill. My fingers brushed a hidden latch, and with a slow grinding noise, a compartment revealed itself beneath the stone. Inside lay a collection of objects, a faded locket, a cracked mirror shard, a bundle of dried herbs, and a sealed letter penned in shaky handwriting. The letter spoke of remorse and a plea for forgiveness, revealing the final desperate act to break the curse. But it was incomplete, the final piece of the ritual missing or lost. I realized then that the estate's torment would not end until someone fulfilled the ritual properly, someone willing to confront the darkness and restore balance. The statues around me seemed to lean closer as if urging me onward, their marble eyes reflecting a hope I had not expected. The air grew heavier as twilight deepened, wrapping the estate in a cloak of muted shadows. I stood before the altar, clutching the brittle letter and the faded locket, feeling the weight of centuries pressing on my shoulders. The moonlight caressed the garden's contours, lending an ethereal glow to the statues that had silently witnessed so much sorrow and suffering. I knew what had to be done. The ritual was incomplete, its missing piece buried somewhere within the estate's dark heart. To restore peace, to free the restless souls tethered to this land, I had to find it, and confront the shadows that guarded it. Each step toward the mansion was a step deeper into a story etched in stone and whispered through time. The heavy wooden door groaned as I pushed it open, revealing corridors choked with dust and memories. The silence was broken only by the soft tapping of my footsteps and the distant rustle of unseen things stirring in the darkness. The portraits lining the walls seemed to watch me, their eyes alive with secrets. Somewhere in this labyrinth of forgotten rooms, I hoped to find the key to completing the ritual. In the library, I discovered a hidden drawer in the desk, carefully concealed beneath false panels. Inside lay an ancient book bound in cracked leather, its pages yellowed and brittle. The script was archaic but familiar, the same symbols that adorned the altar. As I read, the ritual's final step unfolded before me, a sacrifice not of blood, but of memory. One had to offer a fragment of their own past, painful, hidden truths willingly surrendered, to break the curse's hold. My breath caught. The cost was personal, the path perilous. Yet I felt a strange calm settle within me, a resolve forged from the knowledge that some burdens must be borne for the hope of freedom. Outside, the statues remained motionless, their eternal vigil unbroken. But in the quiet garden, beneath the watchful eyes of stone and moonlight, I prepared to face what had long been buried, and to finally set the estate's tortured souls free. The statues had returned to their original positions, facing random directions once again, as if the night's eerie choreography had never transpired. Yet, I knew better now. They were always watching, silent sentinels poised to guide the next unwitting caretaker into the heart of the ancient enigma lurking within those dark woods. I packed my belongings that morning, forfeiting my payment and breaking the contract without hesitation. When Mrs. Blackwood called 2 days later, her voice tinged with a weary relief, I told her simply that the job wasn't what I had expected. Her acceptance felt less like surprise and more like resignation, as if she had heard such departures from many before me. Weeks later, despite relocating across the state and burying myself in the cacophony of city life, the marble eyes still haunt me. Midnight wakes find me shivering under the weight of their unseen gaze through my bedroom window. I've traded the quiet garden for urban noise and light, but some things can never be left behind. Some knowledge etches itself indelibly upon the soul. Sometimes, in the flicker of my peripheral vision, I swear I glimpse the statues once more. And sometimes, in the shadowed corners of my mind, I wonder if I want them to find me again. Story 4. The brass compass felt unnervingly cold in my palm the moment I held it, a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. My sister had unearthed it at an estate sale, nestled amid tarnished lockets and broken timepieces. She swore it was perfect for my hiking obsession. But the compass was different. The needle quivered behind the glass like a trapped insect, never resting, always restless. I should have discarded it that first night when its erratic ticking robbed me of sleep. 3 days later, on the Cascade Mountain Trail, the compass nestled deep in my backpack. I tried to ignore its presence. The October air bit sharply, the maple leaves crackling beneath my boots like brittle bones. Though I knew this route intimately, something was off. The forest thickened inexplicably, shadows stretched longer as if the trees had crept closer overnight. Landmarks warped, tilted unnaturally, straining my eyes to focus. A fallen log, once a familiar resting spot, now resembled a creature's twisted limbs rather than wood. My hands trembled when I checked my phone's trail map. The GPS pinpointed my location correctly, but the compass app spun erratically, unable to lock onto magnetic north. Pulling out the antique compass, my throat tightened. The needle pointed unwaveringly toward a direction that defied every navigational law I knew, aiming deep into uncharted wilderness, toward places absent from any map. Rational thought screamed warnings as my boots left the marked trail, sinking into earth blanketed by decades of fallen leaves. Branches scratched my jacket, whispering secrets too faint to comprehend. The deeper I ventured, the colder the air grew, my breath bloomed in white puffs despite the sun filtering weakly through the canopy. The compass seemed to leash me forward, each step dragging me deeper into the unknown. Thorns tore at my clothes, their sting a cruel reminder of the forest's hostile embrace. The ground grew treacherous, riddled with hidden holes threatening to twist my ankles. After what felt like hours, or perhaps only minutes, the dense trees began to thin. The thinning forest opened up to a small clearing bathed in an otherworldly light, the fading sun filtering through a veil of mist that clung to the ground like ghostly fingers. The compass needle remained steadfast, pointing toward the center of this glade where an ancient stone pedestal stood, half swallowed by moss and creeping ivy. As I stepped closer, the air grew colder still, the temperature dropping sharply as if the clearing were a pocket of frozen time. The pedestal bore carvings, intricate symbols twisting and curling in patterns that seemed to writhe beneath my gaze. I traced them with trembling fingers, feeling a strange pulse, as if the stone itself was alive. Suddenly, the compass began to spin wildly in my hand, its needle jerking erratically before settling to point not at the pedestal, but beyond it, toward the dark woods on the far edge of the clearing. A chill ran down my spine as I turned slowly to face the shadowed tree line. There, barely visible among the trunks, was a figure, a silhouette that shifted and shimmered, as if made of smoke and shadow. The forest held its breath. The figure stepped forward, revealing a face both beautiful and terrible, eyes burning with an ancient fire. Its voice, when it spoke, was like the rustle of dry leaves, barely audible but unmistakably commanding. You have followed the path, but the journey has only begun. My heart thundered as the compass grew heavy in my palm, its coldness now a burning heat. The figure beckoned, and I knew that to uncover the truth hidden deep within this wilderness, I must cross the threshold, into a realm where reality bent and shadows whispered secrets long forgotten. The air around me thickened as I stepped forward, the forest's silence broken only by the soft crunch of leaves beneath my boots. The figure's eyes glowed faintly, like embers struggling against the dark, and their presence seemed to ripple the very fabric of the world around us. As I crossed the clearing's edge, the compass burned hot in my hand, its needle spinning wildly, then suddenly freezing, pointing ahead into the depths of shadow that stretched beyond. With every step, the trees grew taller, their twisted branches intertwining overhead like skeletal fingers clawing at the sky. The ground beneath me pulsed subtly, as if alive, guiding me deeper into a place unbound by ordinary time. Whispers drifted on the breeze, fragments of forgotten songs and ancient incantations, wrapping around me like a shroud. Shadows flickered at the edge of vision, shapes shifting and dancing just beyond clear sight. Suddenly, the figure halted. Raising a slender hand, it traced a slow arc through the air. The world shifted. The trees blurred and bent, the night deepening into a velvet abyss speckled with distant stars that pulsed in eerie rhythm. I was no longer in the forest I knew. This was a realm between realms, a liminal space where spirits roamed free, where time folded back upon itself. The figure's voice echoed, both near and far. Here lies the heart of the curse, where forgotten grief festers and binds the living to the dead. From the shadows emerged ethereal forms, faces pale and mournful, eyes hollow yet pleading. They drifted silently, reaching toward me with hands made of mist, their sorrow palpable. Fear threatened to root me to the spot, but beneath it surged a fierce resolve. I had come too far to turn away now. The compass glowed fiercely, illuminating a narrow path winding through the spectral throng. Each step forward was a step through memory, pain, and redemption. I knew the final trial awaited, a confrontation with the very source of the curse, a moment that would demand every ounce of courage and truth I possessed. The spectral figures closed in, their faces etched with sorrow and longing, yet devoid of malice. The air grew heavy with unspoken histories, and the path beneath my feet seemed woven from threads of memory itself, each step a fragile weave of hope and fear. Ahead, the shadows thickened into a towering shape, the source of the curse manifesting as a figure cloaked in darkness, its presence both overwhelming and intimate, as if embodying all the estate's anguish. It spoke without words, a silence filled with accusation and despair. I felt its weight pressing against my chest, demanding reckoning. Gathering my courage, I spoke aloud the truths I had carried, the betrayals, the regrets, the hidden pains long buried. Each confession broke a thread in the dark weave binding this place, and the figure's form flickered, weakening. The spectral crowd whispered in a rising chorus, their grief turning to a solemn melody of release. Light blossomed around me, warming the frozen night, and the heavy veil lifted from the estate's heart. As dawn's first rays touched the land, the curse unraveled, and the garden's silent watchers found their peace. I stood alone, transformed by the trial, bearing the weight of truths faced and souls freed. The elderly woman's form shimmered softly, her translucent hand reaching out hesitantly toward me. Her eyes, though clouded with the weight of decades, held a flicker of something, hope, perhaps, or desperate yearning. As she moved closer, the rest of the figures in the store gathered near, their silent murmurs filling the air with an unspoken urgency. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding so fiercely I feared it might burst free of my chest. The silence that had blanketed the village moments before felt charged now, alive with these lingering echoes of lives abruptly interrupted. The woman's hand brushed mine, a cold, ethereal touch that sent a shiver racing down my spine. Without words, I understood, they needed my help. Slowly, she led me toward the door, then pointed outside, where the village's dusty main street stretched under the heavy sky. Her other hand gestured to the horizon beyond the trees, as if urging me to look deeper, to find the secret that tethered them to this frozen moment. I stepped outside, the cool air thick with the scent of forgotten time. The compass in my hand remained still, as if waiting for me to discover the truth. As I glanced back, the figures watched silently, their faces a mosaic of sorrow and silent plea. Beyond the edge of the village, the forest loomed dark and impenetrable, whispering secrets that had long awaited discovery. With a deep breath, I began walking toward the shadows, the compass needle finally steady, pointing the way to a truth buried far deeper than any map had ever shown. The forest's edge loomed ahead, a wall of gnarled trunks and tangled branches that swallowed the fading light. The compass needle held steady, a silent beacon drawing me forward into the shadows. With each step, the air thickened, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay, mingled with something ancient, something restless. The village behind me seemed to fade like a half-remembered dream, the translucent figures lingering at the edges of my vision, their silent gazes a weight that pressed against my soul. As I ventured deeper, the trees closed in tighter, their limbs weaving a canopy so dense that even the moon struggled to pierce the gloom. The ground beneath was uneven, roots twisting and curling like serpents, threatening to trip me at every step. A cold wind whispered through the branches, carrying faint murmurs, voices layered and overlapping, speaking in languages I could not understand but somehow felt within my bones. Suddenly, the path opened to a clearing bathed in a pale, unnatural light. At its center stood a stone altar, worn and cracked by time, inscribed with the same twisting symbols that adorned the compass and the village altar. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, cloaked in darkness, face obscured beneath a hood. It moved with a grace that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. The air grew still as the figure spoke in a voice that echoed in my mind rather than my ears. "You have come far, seeker. Here lies the truth that binds this place, a curse born of betrayal and forgotten promises. Will you bear its weight and set us free?" My breath caught. The compass glowed faintly, its needle spinning once, then settling firmly toward the altar. I stepped forward, heart pounding, ready to face whatever lay hidden beneath the shadows and silence. The cold night air pressed in on me as I approached the stone altar, every step echoing with the weight of centuries. The symbols etched into its surface seemed to writhe beneath the faint glow of the compass, pulsing like a heartbeat in the darkness. The cloaked figure stood silent, an imposing presence that seemed to absorb the very light around it. As I reached the altar, the compass in my hand grew warm, almost burning. Its needle pointed directly to the center of the stone slab, where a shallow depression held a faded, cracked locket, the same one my sister had found at the estate sale so long ago. The figure's voice filled my mind, a whisper that resonated deep within my soul. "To break the curse, you must offer a truth, a memory bound to your heart, a regret you carry still." I hesitated, memories flooding in, mistakes, betrayals, secrets I had buried deep beneath layers of denial. But as I looked into the abyss before me, I understood that this was no ordinary trial. To free the trapped souls and myself, I had to confront my own darkness. Taking a deep breath, I placed the locket into the depression and closed my eyes. I summoned the memory I feared most, the moment I chose cowardice over courage, silence over truth. A sharp pain pierced my chest as if the very air conspired to squeeze my heart. Shadows twisted and coalesced around me, whispering my confession, weaving it into the fabric of the night. The altar glowed brighter, the symbols flaring with radiant light. The compass shattered in my hand, releasing a burst of energy that rippled through the clearing. The cloaked figure lifted its hood, revealing a face serene yet sorrowful, the spirit bound to this place, now freed. The forest sighed, the weight of ages lifting as dawn broke over the horizon. I stood alone, transformed by the night's ordeal, the burden of truth both a wound and a healing. The elderly woman pointed to herself, then to the others, and finally made a wide, sweeping gesture that seemed to encompass the entire village. Her face twisted with confusion and desperation, a silent cry that tightened my chest with aching sympathy. These weren't ghosts in any traditional sense, not spirits departed and lingering, but the very residents themselves, caught suspended between existence and oblivion. They remembered their confusion but were trapped in an endless limbo, denied answers or peace. The shopkeeper's hands moved in deliberate, intricate gestures. First, he pointed to a calendar on the wall, then to the sky visible through the grimy window, and finally to his own chest. He repeated this sequence until the meaning crystallized in my mind. Time had stopped for them on that very October day in 1952. They remained conscious but frozen in place, living every moment since, while the world outside moved on without them. A young man near the doorway stepped forward, his transparent form twisting with urgency. He pointed to me, then to the compass clutched in my trembling hand, and back to himself. The truth struck me like a blow. The compass had not brought me here by chance. It was crafted specifically for this purpose, to find those who had been lost to the unnatural force that had ensnared the village. My vision blurred at the edges as the crushing weight of responsibility settled upon me. These souls, if they could still be called that, had waited over 70 years for someone to notice, someone to acknowledge their existence, someone to seek answers about their fate. And somehow, impossibly, that someone was me. The elderly woman approached slowly, her form solidifying with each step. When her cool, electric touch brushed my cheek, a flood of images poured into my mind. I saw the village in its prime, children laughing in sunlit streets, neighbors chatting over fences, the gentle hum of daily life. Then, the moment everything unraveled. It began subtly, an unease in the air, a thickening that made breathing laborious. Familiar places shifted inexplicably when unobserved. Time itself distorted, moments stretched and snapped back like taffy, conversations paused and restarted without memory of what had passed. Then, without warning, it happened. The village was suspended between heartbeats, trapped in a pocket of disconnected reality. They could see and attempt to communicate with one another, but were powerless to affect the physical world. They watched helplessly as seasons changed, buildings aged, and hikers passed mere feet away, unaware of their desperate calls for help. My knees buckled, and I collapsed onto the dusty floor of the general store. The translucent figures surrounded me, faces etched with hope that chilled me more than their spectral forms. They believed I could help, to restore them to time's flow or at least uncover the truth behind their prison. But I was just a hiker with a broken compass. My hands shook violently, overwhelmed by the impossible task laid before me. The shopkeeper knelt beside me, his ghostly hand hovering near my shoulder, communicating through gestures that others had found the village over the decades, researchers, investigators, drawn by tales of disappearances and strange phenomena. Yet none could see the trapped souls. Their fate remained a mystery. The weight of the shopkeeper's silent message pressed on me like a stone. Others had come before, drawn by stories whispered on the wind, only to leave without answers, their footsteps fading into the same silence that cloaked the village. I forced myself to rise, breath ragged but resolve hardening. If no one else could see them, then I was the unlikely bridge between worlds. The compass in my hand pulsed faintly, a steady rhythm that seemed to call me forward. Outside, the village lay bathed in the eerie stillness of suspended time. The buildings waited patiently, frozen mid-story, their secrets trapped like echoes in an empty room. I followed the path leading deeper into the settlement, each step stirring a faint ripple in the air, as if the very fabric of this place hesitated to let me pass. An old well stood in the center of the village square, its stones worn smooth by decades of neglect. The elderly woman from the store gestured toward it, then toward the sky, then to me. I understood, this well was the heart of the anomaly, a focal point where time fractured and trapped the villagers. Approaching cautiously, I peered into its depths. Darkness yawned back at me, swallowing the weak light from my flashlight. From its blackness, a faint hum vibrated, a low, mournful sound that seemed to carry both sorrow and warning. The compass needle pulsed stronger, its glow illuminating strange symbols etched into the well's rim, symbols matching those I'd seen on the altar back in the forest clearing. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath my feet. The figures around me grew restless, their translucent forms flickering with agitation. I sensed their fear, their longing for release growing desperate. Determined, I knelt beside the well and traced the symbols with trembling fingers, feeling a strange warmth ripple through my skin. A voice whispered in my mind, soft, ancient, and filled with pleading. To break the cycle, you must open the way, but only with the truth you carry inside. The weight of those words settled heavily. My memories, my regrets, the secrets I held, they were the key. I took a deep breath, steeling myself to face not only the village's torment but the darkness within my own soul. The compass glowed brightly in my palm, its light piercing the shadowed depths as I prepared to unlock the mystery that had bound this village for 70 long years. The air around the well thickened, vibrating with a silent energy that pressed against my skin like the weight of 1,000 unseen hands. I knelt beside the ancient stones, the etched symbols pulsing faintly beneath my fingertips as if alive. The village's restless souls gathered around me, their translucent forms trembling with anticipation, their eyes pleading for salvation. A heavy truth settled within me, the memories I had long buried, the regrets I hid deep inside, were no longer mine alone. They had become intertwined with this place, a tether binding me to the fate of those lost souls. Taking a deep breath, I closed my eyes and let the flood of my own past wash over me. The moments of cowardice, of silence when I should have spoken, of wrongs I failed to right, all laid bare in the quiet darkness behind my closed lids. Whispers rose from the well, swirling around me like a spectral breeze, carrying fragments of stories long forgotten. The villagers' faces softened, their sorrow mingling with hope as if my confession was the key they had awaited. The compass in my hand glowed brighter, its needle steady and unwavering, pointing directly into the abyss below. With trembling hands, I pressed the compass into the well's center, feeling a sudden surge of warmth flood through my body. The ground beneath me shuddered as ancient stones shifted, and a radiant light erupted from the depths, washing over the village and the gathered spirits. The suspended time began to unravel, moments snapping back into place as the village stirred with life once more. Shadows faded, and the air lightened as a gentle breeze whispered through the trees. One by one, the translucent figures smiled, their forms solidifying into flesh and bone. The elderly woman's hand reached for mine, warm and real. "You have freed us," she whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you." As dawn broke fully, the village awoke from its 70-year slumber, and the curse that bound it was finally broken. I stood alone by the well, transformed by the night's ordeal, bearing the scars of truth, yet holding the fragile hope of redemption. The visitors had wandered through the village for years, photographing, measuring, documenting, never sensing the desperate souls who hovered just beyond sight, begging for acknowledgement. As the sun dipped low, casting elongated shadows through grimy windows, the figures grew restless, their gestures frantic and insistent. They pointed repeatedly toward the dense forest, toward the very path I had taken. Their message was clear and urgent: I needed to leave before nightfall. Darkness deepened the rift, making the barrier between their frozen reality and mine impenetrable. With trembling legs, I rose, the compass heavy as lead in my hand. Its needle spun wildly before locking, unwavering, toward the hiking trail and the world I knew. The villagers followed silently to the forest's edge, their forms fading with every step away from their timeless prison. At the tree line, I turned back for one final glance. Their faces bore a haunting blend of crushing disappointment and quiet understanding. They had waited 70 long years for someone to find them. Though I was leaving without answers, their eyes held gratitude, for finally being seen, acknowledged, and remembered. The hike back was a blur of unsteady steps and racing thoughts. By the time I reached my car, night had fallen and the forest had resumed its familiar chorus. Yet the compass pulsed steadily in my palm, its needle fixed unerringly toward the hidden village. That night, surrounded by maps and glowing screens, I searched for any record of disappearances in the Cascade Mountains in 1952. What I found chilled me to the core. An entire settlement, Haven's Rest, had vanished overnight on October 15, 1952. 43 residents, from infants to elderly couples, had disappeared without a trace. Official reports cited a vague evacuation due to emergency, but letters from residents up to the day of disappearance told no such story. The village ceased to exist in official records, yet continued to send desperate messages unheard by the outside world. I understood then why the compass had found me. The antique was crafted by someone who knew of Haven's Rest and had searched for it, just as I was led to it. Yet this knowledge brought no comfort, only a heavier burden. The villagers remained trapped, still waiting, hoping someone could restore them to time's natural flow. Somehow, I had become their sole link to the living world. The brass compass pulsed with an eerie life, a constant reminder that some mysteries demand more than discovery, they require resolution. I knew I would return to Haven's Rest. Not tomorrow, perhaps not soon, but inevitably. The translucent faces haunted my dreams and my waking mind, their silent questions urging me on. Somewhere, hidden in archives or forgotten documents, lay the key to sever the village's temporal chains. Until then, the compass would keep pointing the way, calling me back to those caught in the spaces between moments, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to seek the truth. Story 5. Some trails aren't meant to be found. They slip between mapped territories, hidden behind fallen logs and tangled brush, lying in wait for the unwary hiker who strays too far from marked paths. The forest was dense here, untouched by the footsteps of casual wanderers. The trail I'd stumbled upon wasn't on any map, wasn't marked by any sign or blazed tree. It was a narrow ribbon of earth swallowed by undergrowth, framed by towering pines and ancient oaks whose gnarled branches intertwined like fingers weaving a secret spell. With every step I took, the canopy thickened, dimming the daylight to a twilight gloom. The air grew cool and damp, carrying the scent of moss, wet earth, and something faintly metallic, an undertone that set my nerves on edge. The trail twisted unpredictably, veering left and right, often doubling back on itself. Time felt fractured here, moments slipping in and out of focus. The sun would peek through the leaves, then vanish behind thick clouds, casting the path in shifting shadows. I pressed forward, compelled by a mixture of curiosity and unease. The underbrush rustled with life unseen, and occasionally, the crack of a snapped twig echoed too close behind me. Yet when I turned, nothing but empty forest stared back. After what felt like hours, I came upon a clearing that seemed impossibly out of place. The trees were older here, colossal, their trunks wide as cabins, bark cracked and silvered by time. In the center stood a stone cairn, piled high with rocks smoothed by countless hands. At its base lay a weathered wooden box, its surface carved with symbols that mirrored those I'd seen at Haven's Rest and on the altar in the village. As I knelt to examine the box, a sudden hush fell over the forest, as though the very air held its breath. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as I reached out and lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in faded cloth, was a small, intricately carved amulet and a folded letter, yellowed and brittle. The letter's handwriting was shaky but deliberate, speaking of a path hidden between worlds, trails that led to places forgotten, and warnings of those who dared to stray too far. It spoke of a guardian, a shadow that watched over these forgotten paths, ensuring that some secrets remained buried. As I read, a chill crept down my spine. The forest around me darkened unnaturally, and I felt eyes upon me, watching, waiting. The trail I had found was no ordinary path. It was a threshold, a passage between realities, and I had crossed it unknowingly. The amulet in my hands felt heavier than its size suggested, as if it carried the weight of all the stories and secrets tied to this forsaken trail. I unfolded the brittle letter with trembling fingers, reading on as the words wove a chilling tale of those who'd vanished, lost hikers who'd crossed into realms unseen, trapped between worlds, never to return. A low wind stirred through the clearing, rustling leaves and carrying whispers that were almost audible, ghostly voices just beyond understanding. The forest seemed to darken further, the fading light retreating beneath an unnatural shadow that slithered between the ancient trees. My skin prickled, hairs rising as the sensation of unseen eyes intensified. From the edge of the clearing, a figure emerged, tall and indistinct, cloaked in shifting shadows. Its presence exuded a cold authority, as if it belonged both to this world and some other, darker place. The Guardian. Its voice was a haunting melody, neither malevolent nor kind, but resolute. You have trespassed where few dare tread. The paths you walk are woven with the threads of forgotten souls. Why do you seek what should remain hidden? I swallowed hard, my heart pounding like a drum in the silence. I don't want to trespass. I want to understand. To find those who've been lost, and maybe, help them. The Guardian's form seemed to ripple with ancient power. Help comes at a price. The trail demands a sacrifice, not of flesh, but of certainty. To walk these paths is to embrace the unknown, to relinquish control. A chill swept through me, yet beneath it stirred a strange courage. I nodded, accepting the unspoken terms. The Guardian extended a hand, pale and shifting like smoke, and as I took it, the forest dissolved around me. Trees stretched into infinite darkness, the ground gave way to mist, and I was carried into a realm where time bent and shadows danced. Here, between moments and memories, the true journey began. The moment my fingers closed around the Guardian's ethereal hand, the world around me dissolved into a swirling mist of shadow and light. Trees stretched and warped, their trunks elongating into endless columns that disappeared into a void above and below. The ground beneath me seemed to vanish, replaced by shifting clouds of mist that coiled and twisted like restless spirits. I was no longer in the forest I knew. Instead, I floated suspended in a realm between realities, a liminal space where time bent, memories bled into one another, and the laws of nature held no dominion. The Guardian's grip tightened gently, a tether anchoring me to this unsteady world. Its voice echoed, not through the air, but directly within my mind. This is the Vale, it said. A place where lost souls wander, caught between the world of the living and the forgotten beyond. To find those who vanished, you must journey through the Vale's labyrinth. Face the echoes of your own past, the fears you bury deep, and the truths you deny. Images flickered before me, faces from my childhood, moments of joy and pain, mistakes I wished to forget. Shadows twisted these memories, distorting them into trials I would have to confront. A path of faint light stretched out ahead, winding through shifting mists and shadowed forms. The Guardian released my hand, gesturing toward the path. Walk with purpose. The Vale tests all who enter. Only those willing to confront themselves can emerge with the knowledge to restore balance. With a steadying breath, I stepped forward onto the path. The mist curled around my ankles like icy fingers, the air thick with whispered voices. Each step was a step deeper into my own soul's hidden chambers, places of fear, regret, and hope. Behind me, the Guardian faded into shadow, its presence lingering like a promise and a warning. The journey through the Vale had begun. The path ahead shimmered with an uncertain light, flickering like a fragile flame in a storm. Each step I took sent ripples through the mist, the boundary between reality and memory blurring with every footfall. Faces, some familiar, some hauntingly strange, materialized at the edges of vision, their silent gazes heavy with judgment and longing. The first trial emerged suddenly, a vast hall lined with mirrors stretching into infinity. As I stepped inside, my reflection fractured, multiplying into countless versions of myself, each bearing a different face of regret, fear, and hope. Voices echoed, some accusing, others pleading. I confronted memories I had long buried, failures I tried to forget, moments of cowardice, and the silent wounds of lost connections. Each reflection challenged me to own these truths, to accept their weight without fleeing. The air grew thick with emotion as shadows danced among the mirrors, whispering secrets and offering both torment and solace. I realized that to navigate the Vale, I had to embrace all parts of myself, even the darkest corners. With newfound resolve, I stepped forward, the fragmented reflections merging into a single, clearer image, a self more whole and honest than before. Beyond the hall, the path twisted deeper into the Vale, leading toward the heart of the mystery and the souls waiting to be freed. The fragmented reflections faded, leaving me standing alone in a narrowing corridor of swirling mist. The air grew colder, heavier, as if the very weight of sorrow pressed against my chest. Ahead, a faint, pulsating light beckoned, a distant heart beating within the shadows. As I moved toward it, the whispers transformed into voices, soft, mournful, and unmistakably human. They spoke of betrayal, loss, and a promise broken long ago. The path opened into a cavernous chamber carved from stone, where a spectral figure awaited. She was both beautiful and tragic, draped in flowing garments that shimmered like moonlight on water. Her eyes held centuries of grief and hope entwined. She spoke without words, her thoughts flooding my mind. You carry the burden of truth. To free us, you must accept the sacrifice of memory, let go of what anchors you to the past. A sudden surge of memories crashed over me, faces I'd loved, mistakes I'd made, the ache of things left undone. The chamber seemed to pulse in time with my heartbeat, the shadows twisting and bending like living things. With trembling hands, I reached out, willing myself to release the pain that had bound me. As I did, the spectral figure smiled, a glimmer of peace breaking through the sorrow. Light blossomed throughout the chamber, the weight lifting as the curse began to unravel. Outside, the village stirred, the first breath of dawn breaking through decades of stillness. I stood transformed, scarred yet unburdened, bearing the fragile hope of redemption for those lost in time. The air inside the cavern thickened, heavy with a strange pulse that seemed to beat in time with my own frantic heartbeat. Each brushstroke on the walls was vivid and unsettling, every detail captured with unnerving precision. There I was, trapped in the endless mural, living moments I barely noticed in life, now immortalized in ancient pigment. I stepped forward, trembling, unable to tear my gaze from the scene of me brushing my teeth, the steam rising from the cup of coffee at the edge of the sink, the soft sigh I let out before leaving the house each morning. The paintings moved beyond mere images, they felt like echoes of my existence, whispers of a hidden observer who knew every facet of my life. My breath hitched as the narrative continued, scenes of me walking down streets, talking to strangers, laughing quietly with friends. But then darker moments emerged, arguments, silent tears in dimly lit rooms, the moments I tried to hide my fears even from myself. The cave had become a gallery of my soul, exposing every secret, every crack in my carefully constructed facade. I turned to retreat, panic rising, but the path behind me had vanished, replaced by endless walls adorned with my own life, painted in colors that seemed to shimmer and shift, alive. A cold whisper brushed past my ear, barely audible, yet unmistakably clear, you can no longer hide. The glow from the paintings intensified, casting flickering shadows that danced and twisted like living things. From the depths of the cavern, a voice, both distant and intimate, called out, a summons to confront what I had long buried. The journey into this ancient place was no accident. It was a reckoning. The voice echoed again, reverberating through the cavern walls and stirring the ancient dust at my feet. It was neither malevolent nor kind, but carried a weight of inevitability, as though the cave itself were the mouthpiece for some forgotten judgment. I swallowed hard, forcing my trembling legs to move deeper into the labyrinth of memories and painted moments. The images around me shifted and pulsed, a living tapestry of my life unfolding in vivid, unbearable clarity. Each step felt heavier, as if the past were a physical burden pressing down, refusing to be ignored. Suddenly, the air grew thick with whispers, fragments of conversations I'd long forgotten, thoughts I'd never dared admit aloud. They spun around me, intangible threads weaving a web I could not escape. A flicker of movement caught my eye, a shadow detaching itself from the wall, coalescing into a figure cloaked in darkness. Its face was obscured, but I felt its gaze boring into me, an intense scrutiny that pierced my soul. You have walked the path of avoidance, it intoned. Now, you must face the truths you have buried deep. Panic surged, but beneath it stirred a flicker of resolve. I couldn't run from this place, not anymore. With a steadying breath, I confronted the shadow. I'm ready. Show me what I must see. The figure nodded, a ripple of energy flowing from it into the walls. The paintings around me erupted in light, illuminating not only my memories but the shadows that lurked between them, the fears, regrets, and unspoken desires. The cavern became a crucible of revelation and reckoning. To escape, I had to embrace every fragment of my truth, no matter how painful. As the night deepened outside, the trial within stretched on, each moment peeling back layers of denial, bringing me closer to a liberation I had long sought but never believed possible. The cavern's light pulsed like a heartbeat, flooding every corner with raw, unfiltered truth. Shadows twisted and writhed, revealing the darkest parts of my soul, painful memories I had hidden, fears I had denied, and regrets I had buried beneath layers of self-deception. Faces from my past appeared, not as they were, but as I had perceived them in moments of weakness and sorrow. The shadowed figure remained, silent but present, its gaze unwavering. It seemed to hold the weight of all I feared, all I sought to avoid. Yet, as I faced the turmoil within, a strange calm began to grow, a fragile hope flickering amidst the storm. With trembling hands, I reached out, not to flee, but to embrace my fractured self. Each step toward acceptance shattered the illusions that had bound me, peeling away the veils of guilt and shame. The cavern seemed to breathe with me, the oppressive darkness giving way to a soft, radiant light. A warmth spread through my chest, filling the void left by years of silence and fear. The shadow dissolved, replaced by a sense of peace I hadn't known in decades. The paintings on the walls brightened, their images blending into a tapestry of healing and renewal. As dawn's first light touched the cave's entrance, I felt myself lifted from the veil, no longer trapped in shadows but carrying the strength born of truth. The compass in my pocket was still, its purpose fulfilled. I emerged into the forest, transformed, not just by what I had seen, but by what I had accepted within myself. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, I walked it free. The warmth of the paint pulsed through my fingertips like a living thing, humming softly as I pressed it against the cool stone. The blank canvas before me seemed to breathe, ready to receive the story that would shape destiny itself. Every stroke I made felt guided by unseen hands, as if the cave and its ancient spirits were merging with my own will, intertwining past and future in a dance of light and shadow. Around me, the luminous doppelgangers watched with an intensity that transcended mere observation. They hungered for release, for transformation. Their glowing eyes bore into mine, urging me onward, their silent communication flooding my mind with waves of purpose and urgency. Each color I mixed shimmered and shifted, some hues deep and iridescent, others bright and piercing, carrying whispers of forgotten memories and lost hopes. As I painted, the walls began to ripple with energy, the images formed not just from pigment, but from the very essence of life itself, weaving a tapestry that was part history, part prophecy. The figures moved closer, their ethereal hands hovering just above the surface, guiding my brush as I shaped new scenes, visions of healing, redemption, and rebirth. I saw paths opening through the forests, villagers reunited with their lost time, shadows dissolving into dawn's light. But beneath the hopeful imagery, darker shapes lurked, echoes of fear, sorrow, and the bindings that had held these souls captive for so long. The painting demanded balance, a truth that acknowledged pain alongside promise, loss alongside hope. My breaths came faster, heart pounding with a mix of awe and terror as the cave itself seemed to pulse in rhythm with the painting's unfolding story. The luminous beings circled me, their light swelling, filling the chamber with radiant warmth. When the final stroke was laid, a hush fell. The cave's glow shifted from frenetic energy to serene illumination, as if a long-held breath had finally been released. The painted figures on the walls brightened and shimmered, no longer static but alive with movement, a living story now complete, a destiny rewritten. The luminous doppelgangers smiled, if such ethereal beings could smile, and slowly began to dissolve, their forms merging back into the cave's stone and light, finally freed. I stepped back, exhausted yet filled with a profound peace. Outside, the first light of dawn crept through the cave's mouth, casting away shadows and heralding a new beginning. The silence in my apartment had thickened into something almost tangible, an oppressive presence that clung to every corner, pressing heavily against my ears and crawling along my skin like unseen, restless spiders. It nestled deep within my chest, stealing my breath with every heartbeat, making the space feel less like home and more like a cage. 3 weeks had passed since I'd brought home the ring of ancient keys from that shadowy flea market stall. The vendor had been a skeletal woman, her yellowed eyes sharp and unblinking, tracking my every movement with the cold patience of a predator watching prey. Her gnarled fingers, bone-thin and veined, gripped the keys so tightly that her knuckles blanched beneath skin stretched almost translucent. When I asked her about their origin, she whispered only, "Some doors are meant to stay locked," before shoving them into my palm with a desperate urgency, a warning I was too naive to heed. The keys had felt ice cold, numbing against my warm skin, their weight unnatural, as if forged from something heavier than mere brass and iron, something ancient and burdened. Now, in the dead hour of night, I stood in my dimly lit living room, the keys resting ominously on the kitchen counter, and I could feel their pull, an invisible force tugging at me, whispering of doors unopened and secrets buried. The stillness was broken only by my own ragged breath and the distant tick of a clock, yet the keys seemed to hum with a silent energy, as if alive with intent. I reached out, fingers trembling, and touched them, cold seeping into my veins, awakening memories I had never lived. With the keys came visions, fleeting images of shadowed hallways, locked rooms hiding unspeakable things, and a door painted in peeling black with symbols I could not decipher but instinctively feared. The keys had chosen me as their bearer, and their weight was not just physical, but spiritual, a burden and a calling entwined. The silence closed in tighter, and somewhere deep within, I knew the night held a reckoning. The ring of keys was more than an artifact, it was a gateway to something dark and old, a puzzle I could no longer ignore. The keys seemed to pulse beneath my fingertips, each one humming with a quiet resonance that echoed deep within my bones. They weren't ordinary keys, no mere tools to open locks, but relics tethered to secrets older than I could fathom. The coldness that had seeped into my skin spread now like ice along my veins, chilling me to the core. Compelled by a force I couldn't resist, I traced the keys across the counter and then tucked the entire ring into my coat pocket. The weight pressed heavily against my thigh as I moved through the dim apartment, senses sharpened by the oppressive silence. There was one door I hadn't dared to approach, the small, nondescript door at the end of the hallway, tucked away behind a faded tapestry. It had always been there, but I had never given it much thought, dismissing it as a utility closet or storage space. Tonight, something was different. Drawn by an instinct older than reason, I found myself standing before it, hand reaching out toward the cold brass doorknob. The keys in my pocket vibrated in urgent harmony, as if recognizing their true home. I pulled out the ring and began trying each key in the lock, the metal clicking softly in the quiet. Finally, one key turned with a reluctant creak, and the door slowly swung open, revealing a darkness so complete it swallowed the weak glow of the hallway light. A musty, ancient scent rose from the darkness, a mixture of dust, decay, and something faintly metallic. The silence beyond the threshold was thick, suffocating, alive with the weight of forgotten memories. Stepping inside, the door groaned shut behind me, sealing off the world I knew. Before me stretched a narrow corridor lined with peeling wallpaper and faded portraits whose eyes seemed to follow my every move. The air was heavy and cold, each breath visible in small, trembling clouds. At the corridor's end stood another door, this one carved with the same arcane symbols etched into the keys. My heart hammered as I reached out, the keys pulsing wildly in my hand. Behind that door awaited answers, and perhaps something far more dangerous. The figure on the four-poster bed was barely more than a flicker of light and shadow, an ephemeral presence wrapped in delicate layers of translucent fabric that fluttered as if caught in a gentle breeze. Her form was fragile, almost dissolving into the moonlit air, yet there was an undeniable weight to her sorrow that filled the room like a tangible mist. Her head lifted slowly, revealing eyes that shimmered with a haunting mixture of hope and despair. She didn't speak, but her gaze reached out, piercing through the silence, beckoning me closer with a silent plea. The air grew thick with a palpable stillness, broken only by the soft rustle of fabric and the distant echo of a lullaby, barely audible yet deeply familiar. I took a hesitant step forward, heart pounding, every instinct screaming caution, yet unable to resist the pull of her silent call. As I approached, The moonlight illuminated a delicate necklace resting on her pale chest, a pendant shaped like a key, tarnished and worn but unmistakably linked to the ring I carried. Her lips parted slightly, and at last, a whisper slipped into the room, fragile and tremulous, "Find it, before the dawn." Before I could respond, the figure began to fade, dissolving into silver mist that drifted upward and vanished through the cracks in the windowpane. The room grew cold, the shadows lengthened, and I was left alone with the echo of her desperate message. The weight of the keys in my pocket felt heavier than ever, the unspoken urgency pressing into my very soul. I knew that whatever I had to find was hidden somewhere, perhaps within the maze of rooms I had yet to unlock or buried deep in the estate's forgotten past. Outside, the night stretched endless and silent, but inside, a storm of questions raged, each one demanding answers before the first light of dawn. The silver pendant burned cold against my chest as I slipped it carefully into my pocket, its weight a chilling reminder of the urgency pressing against my soul. The whispered message echoed in my mind, "Find it, before the dawn." A haunting refrain that left no room for hesitation. Determined, I stepped back through the ornate door and closed it softly behind me. The apartment's walls seemed to breathe around me, shadows stretching like fingers reaching for secrets. My pulse quickened, fueled by a mixture of dread and resolve. Whatever lay ahead, I knew time was slipping away. I retrieved the keys and began testing each one against the doors that had appeared since the ring's arrival. The corridors stretched endlessly, rooms shifting and rearranging like a living puzzle. Every door I opened unveiled fragments of a past tangled with sorrow and mystery, portraits that watched silently, letters stained with tears, clocks frozen at midnight. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes, time losing meaning in this spectral mansion. I felt the weight of unseen eyes, the whispers of forgotten voices threading through the air like a haunting melody. The pendant's cold pulse seemed to guide me, pulling me deeper into the labyrinth. In a dusty study, beneath a loose floorboard, I discovered a small, rusted box. Inside lay a folded letter, penned in delicate script but stained and faded with age. My hands trembled as I unfolded it, reading words that told of a betrayal so deep it shattered a family and cursed a home. The letter spoke of a hidden chamber, sealed by time and sorrow, containing the truth that could free the restless spirits bound by grief and rage. The key to unlocking that chamber, it said, was lost, or hidden in plain sight. Outside, the first light of dawn began to pale the sky, casting a fragile glow over the shifting mansion. The race against time had begun. The woman was more solid than the others, her edges sharper, her presence heavier, more real. When she turned her gaze toward me, her eyes shone with a clarity none of the other spirits possessed. Her lips parted, and her voice came through, no longer the faint, distant whisper I had grown used to, but clear, immediate, undeniable. "You can see us," she said, her voice gentle but heavy with truth. "You can hear us. That means you're one of us now." The words crashed over me like a wave of icy water. My knees nearly gave out as the full weight of realization sank in, piece by terrifying piece. The growing solidity of the spirits, the increasing heft of the keys in my hand, the way my own reflection had grown more translucent each day, I hadn't been helping lost souls escape. I had been joining them. I looked down at my hands, panic rising as I saw the bedroom wall through my palms, the room behind me shimmering and fading. The transformation had been gradual, imperceptible, but now it was undeniable. Every door I'd opened, every conversation with these trapped souls had pulled me deeper into their liminal realm. "The keys," the woman continued, "they don't just open doors. They unlock barriers between worlds. The vendor who sold them to you, she was like us once. She passed the burden on, just as you will." Suddenly, the keys in my hand shifted, scorching hot, then freezing cold, cycling rapidly. I could feel them feeding off my life force, drawing energy to sustain the fragile connection between the living world and this shadowed place where forgotten souls lingered. My apartment, my job, my entire existence, it had all been a fragile illusion, the last glimpse of a life I was leaving behind. Despair threatened to swallow me whole, but then a new understanding dawned. The spirits hadn't lied when they begged for help. They truly wanted freedom. But freedom meant finding someone to replace them, to become the new guardian of the threshold. The woman on the bed watched me with a sorrowful sympathy. Around us, the other spirits gathered, lost souls I had met over weeks, filling the room with their shimmering, mournful presence. The air trembled with their collective yearning. "There is another way," she said softly, "but it demands a sacrifice of a different kind." She explained that the keys were bound to this place, to the memories and lives trapped within. Someone must remain, not as a prisoner, but as a conscious caretaker, ensuring the balance between worlds. This guardian would tend to the keys, preventing the restless spirits from flooding into the living world and consuming it. The choice was mine: follow the cycle and find another to bear the burden, fading into a whisper in empty rooms, or break it by choosing to stay, holding on to my sense of self while protecting the delicate boundary. As dawn painted the phantom mansion in warm gold and amber hues, I made my decision. The keys in my pocket felt lighter, as if accepting their true purpose had freed some of their weight. The spirits began to dissolve, not into oblivion, but into a peaceful rest. At last, I closed the door to my old life behind me, feeling the gravity of my new role settle firmly on my shoulders. The mansion wasn't a prison, it was a sanctuary, a refuge where the forgotten could finally find peace, watched over by someone who understood their pain. I knew the keys would call again, summoning lost souls seeking connection and answers. When they came, I would be ready, not to trap, but to offer the choice I had been given. Seated in the master bedroom's window chair, I watched the sunrise over a world I would never return to. But I was no longer alone. The keys' weight was no longer a burden, but a reminder: some responsibilities were worth embracing, and some sacrifices marked not endings, but new beginnings. The silence that now surrounded me was no longer empty, it was pregnant with possibility, a quiet peace settling deep within my soul. It was the serene satisfaction that comes from knowing you have found your place in the vast, intricate tapestry of existence. When the keys called to their next bearer, I would be ready to offer them the same choice I had been given: the chance to transform a curse into a calling, imprisonment into purpose. The invisible doors would remain, not as traps, but as invitations. Invitations to those brave enough to shoulder the responsibility of the forgotten, strong enough to guard the fragile threshold between worlds, and wise enough to understand that true freedom sometimes means choosing your own chains. Story 7. The brass doorbell chimed, a sound that seemed to resonate deep within my chest, as if it had been waiting decades just to call for me. I shouldn't have stopped. Every rational voice in my mind screamed that stepping into Meridian Antiques was a mistake, but before my conscious mind could object, my feet had already crossed the threshold. That morning had begun like any other: coffee tasting like disappointment, a sluggish commute through molasses-like traffic, and 8 hours lost amid meaningless spreadsheets. But something shifted when I took a detour down Crescent Street, a route I had never traveled despite 12 years in this city. The antique shop had appeared between a vacant barber's and a dry cleaner's, although I was certain those buildings had been joined by an unbroken brick wall yesterday. The window was coated in grime, the objects inside mere shadows that flickered at the edge of my vision. The faded wooden sign read only MAQS, its letters half erased by time. My hands trembled as I pushed open the heavy door, overcome by a strange mixture of dread and curiosity. Inside, the air smelled of dust and something else, something organic, faintly sweet like flowers left too long in stagnant water. Narrow aisles twisted between towering shelves stuffed with objects that defied logic: Victorian dolls perched beside rusted farming tools, ornate mirrors that reflected only shadows, leather-bound books in forgotten languages, and curious mechanical devices whose purposes were mysteries. The proprietor emerged like a specter from the gloom, ancient, his age shifting with the light. Sometimes merely elderly, other times prehistoric. His eyes held a knowing intensity that made my skin crawl, as if he perceived something hidden within me. In a voice like dried leaves scraping concrete, he told me I was welcome to browse, and that sometimes the right objects found their way to the right people at the exact right moment. The way he said "right" sent a shiver through my throat. I wandered aimlessly, fingertips trailing over dusty surfaces, until 3 objects stopped me cold. My heart hammered violently against my ribs, and I pressed a palm to my chest to steady it. The first was a music box of dark wood, its surface carved with intricate, shifting patterns that seemed alive in my peripheral vision. The second, a silver-framed photograph of a couple standing before a house I'd never seen, yet their faces were turned just enough to catch a fragment of familiarity, as if caught mid-conversation. The third, a leather journal, its pages yellowed with age, bound with a ribbon once red, now faded to the color of dried blood. These objects weren't mere relics, they were imprinted on my soul. The music box played my favorite lullaby. The photograph showed the house of my happiest memories. The journal held my deepest thoughts and most treasured secrets. The room seemed to grow colder as I reached out to touch the music box. The carvings on its surface shifted subtly under my fingers, the patterns twisting like living vines. With trembling hands, I lifted the lid. A soft, haunting melody poured forth, the lullaby I hadn't heard since childhood, but one that lingered in the deepest corners of my memory. The notes wove through the air like a spectral thread, pulling at something buried deep within me. The photograph beckoned next. I traced the faces of the couple, feeling an odd surge of familiarity mixed with unease. The house behind them was shrouded in shadow, but the air around the image shimmered as if alive. A whisper brushed past my ear, a name I had long forgotten, spoken in a voice both tender and mournful. Finally, my fingers closed around the leather journal. Its worn cover felt impossibly heavy, as though containing not just pages but the weight of a lifetime. I carefully untied the faded ribbon and opened it to the first page. The handwriting was elegant yet shaky, words penned with a mixture of hope and despair. The entries spoke of love lost and found, of secrets kept and burdens carried in silence. As I read, the room seemed to dissolve around me, replaced by vivid scenes from a past I thought was mine alone. Memories flickered like fragmented film reels, laughter in sunlit gardens, whispered promises beneath starlit skies, and shadows lurking just beyond the edge of joy. But beneath these recollections lay something darker, a creeping sense of intrusion, as if these memories were not solely my own. The antique shop, the music box, the photograph, and the journal, they were threads woven into a tapestry larger than myself, pulling me toward a truth I was both desperate and terrified to uncover. A sudden chill swept through the shop as the proprietor's voice cut through the silence, low and knowing. Every object has a story, but some stories are bound to more than memory. They carry the echoes of those who lived them, and those who still watch. I looked up, eyes meeting his gaze, an unspoken warning passing between us. The journey I had begun was no accident, and the answers I sought might unravel more than just forgotten tales. The proprietor's gaze bore into me, sharp and unyielding, as if he could see the tangled threads of my past and future woven together within the shadows of the shop. He moved silently between the aisles, his fingers grazing over dusty relics with reverence, and, at times, with something akin to sorrow. Objects like these, he murmured, are more than mere keepsakes. They are vessels, containers of memories, emotions, and sometimes, the very souls of those who once cherished them. But when those souls are restless, their echoes can pull the living into their world. My heart quickened. What do you mean? How can something like a music box or a photograph do that? He smiled, a slow, knowing curl of lips. The line between this world and the next is thinner than most realize. Some things cling to what remains, memories, regrets, unfinished stories. And sometimes, the living become entwined in those stories, whether by fate, by chance, or by design. A sudden coldness swept through the shop, and the shadows lengthened, crawling along the walls like living things. The proprietor's eyes glinted in the dim light. You've been chosen, whether you realize it or not. The keys, the objects, they've called to you because your story intersects with theirs. The weight of his words settled on me, heavy and undeniable. I felt the pull of unseen threads, connecting me to the figures in the photographs, the music box's mournful tune, the whispered confessions penned in the journal. Why me? I asked, voice barely a whisper. Because sometimes, he said softly, a soul carries within it the power to heal what was broken, to untangle knots others cannot. But be warned, the path is perilous. The closer you come to the truth, the deeper you'll be drawn into the web. I nodded, resolve hardening within me. Whatever awaited in the shadows of this mystery, I had crossed the threshold. There was no turning back. The antique shop seemed to pulse around me, alive with secrets waiting to be unraveled. And as I stepped deeper into its labyrinthine aisles, the music box's lullaby played softly in the background, a haunting melody guiding me toward an unknown destiny. The music box's soft, haunting lullaby wove through the cramped aisles like a thread pulling me forward, deeper into Meridian Antique's tangled heart. The proprietor's warning echoed in my mind, a stark reminder that every object held secrets, some delicate and wistful, others dark and dangerous. I cradled the music box carefully, feeling its strange warmth pulsing faintly beneath the carved wood. My fingers traced the shifting patterns as if they might unlock hidden doors beyond the shop's walls. Somewhere, beyond the cluttered shelves and shadowed corners, the truth waited, buried in memories and whispered confessions. The journal rested heavily in my bag, its worn leather cover bearing the stains of time and sorrow. I was drawn to its pages like a moth to a flame, desperate to understand the stories locked within. I had to know why these objects resonated so deeply, why they seemed stitched into the very fabric of my being. Hours passed unnoticed as I pored over the journal in the dim light of my apartment. The entries unfolded like a fractured diary, notes of love and loss, cryptic references to places I had never heard of, and unsettling mentions of a curse tied to the house in the photograph. A name appeared repeatedly, Evelyn. The writer spoke of her in reverent, haunted tones. I felt a pang of recognition, though I couldn't place the name or face. One passage chilled me to the bone. The house holds us, and the past is never truly gone. Shadows lengthen with each passing day, and the keys must never fall into the wrong hands. For some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again. I closed the journal, heart pounding. The music box chimed softly on my desk, the lullaby's notes weaving around me like a spectral embrace. A sudden knock at the door jolted me from my reverie. The knock at the door was sharp, urgent, almost desperate. My heart lurched as the lullaby from the music box softened to a fading echo. I set the journal down carefully, every nerve on edge, and moved toward the entrance. Peering through the peephole, I saw a figure cloaked in shadow, their features obscured by the dim light of the hallway. Hesitation gripped me, but something in their posture, a cautious urgency, compelled me to unlock and open the door. A woman stepped inside, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and recognition. She was older than I expected, with streaks of silver woven through dark hair and a face etched with lines that spoke of grief and resilience. "I've been looking for you," she said, her voice low but steady. "You have something that belongs to my family, something that shouldn't be here." The air between us thickened, charged with unspoken histories. She reached out, fingers trembling, and gently touched the leather-bound journal in my hands. "My name is Margaret," she continued. "Evelyn's sister. You don't know it yet, but you've become part of something much bigger than yourself." My mind raced. How did she know about Evelyn? About the journal? And why was she here now, after all this time? Before I could respond, she placed a small, worn key in my palm, one unlike any I had seen before. The metal was cool but pulsed faintly with a hidden life. "This key," Margaret said, "opens the door that holds the truth. But beware, once opened, nothing will ever be the same." The weight of her words settled heavily. The mystery was no longer confined to dusty pages and shadowed antiques. It was real, immediate, and dangerously close. With Margaret's key burning faintly in my palm, a strange mixture of dread and resolve settled deep within me. The air around us seemed to thicken, heavy with the weight of countless untold stories, and the quiet hum of the music box's lullaby still lingered in the room, like a distant echo guiding me forward. "Where is the door?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Margaret hesitated, her eyes reflecting a storm of emotions, fear, sorrow, and determination. It's hidden within the house in the photograph. The house that you saw, the one tied to Evelyn's memories. No one has dared enter it for decades. The townsfolk speak of it only in hushed tones, as a place where time itself fractures, and the past refuses to rest. I felt the gravity of her words pull at me, yet I knew there was no turning back. The key in my hand was not just a tool, but a symbol of a journey I had already begun. Margaret reached into her coat and pulled out a faded map, its edges worn and torn, marked with cryptic symbols and a path leading deep into the forest just beyond the city's edge. "We must go now," she said. "Before the sun sets and the house seals itself again." Together, we stepped into the twilight, the sky painted in bruised purples and fading golds. The journey ahead was uncertain, but the key, and the promise of answers, was in my grasp. As we approached the edge of the forest, shadows lengthened, twisting and curling like smoke around the gnarled trees. The wind whispered secrets through the leaves, and I felt the unmistakable pull of the unknown. At last, the house emerged, a looming silhouette against the darkening sky, its windows like vacant eyes staring into the soul of the world. The air grew colder, and the ground beneath our feet felt unnaturally still. Margaret's hand tightened around mine as we approached the front door, the faded photograph vivid in my mind's eye. I slid the key into the lock, the metal whispering against ancient mechanisms. The door groaned open, revealing a darkness deeper and thicker than anything I had imagined. Beyond it lay the secrets of Evelyn, of her family, and of the curse that had entwined us all in its relentless grasp. The memories hit me with overwhelming force, so vivid, so raw, that I staggered back from the photograph as if struck. The coffee shop on Fifth Street, the nervous laughter, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about stars, the feel of her hand brushing mine as I reached for the same book. All of it felt impossibly real, yet utterly foreign. How could I recall moments I had no memory of living? Sarah's presence filled my thoughts like a haunting melody, bittersweet and elusive. The name echoed through the silence of my apartment, filling every corner with the ache of a connection severed by time or circumstance. Shaking, I turned my attention to the leather journal. Its faded ribbon uncoiled with reluctant ease, and as I opened the brittle pages, a cascade of words poured out, intimate confessions, dreams shared in the quietest hours, promises whispered beneath starry skies. The handwriting was unmistakably mine, yet the stories were ones I had never written, memories I had never consciously owned. The journal spoke of love and loss, of paths crossed and diverged, of secrets kept and truths long buried. Each page wove a narrative that pulled me deeper into a life that felt both mine and utterly alien. I sank into a chair, the weight of the objects heavy in my lap, my mind a storm of confusion and longing. The proprietor's sharp gaze lingered in my memory, his words about objects as vessels for restless souls taking on new meaning. Had these items chosen me because I was lost too? A fragment of a life shattered, waiting to be made whole again. The music box chimed softly once more, its lullaby wrapping around me like a spectral embrace. Outside, the city's hum faded, and I felt myself teetering on the edge of something profound and terrifying. The lullaby from the music box lingered in the air like a fading echo, intertwining with the restless ache in my chest. I clutched the three objects tighter, as if by holding onto them I might anchor myself to some semblance of reality. Yet the harder I grasped, the more elusive everything else seemed to become. Sarah's name reverberated through my thoughts, stirring memories that felt like shards of glass, sharp, fragmented, and piercing. I remembered the warmth of her smile, the way her laughter had once chased away shadows, and the lingering scent of jasmine that seemed to follow her wherever she went. But these recollections were like whispers from a dream, intangible, fleeting, and just beyond my reach. Driven by a compulsion I barely understood, I reached for my phone and typed her name into the search bar. Results flickered across the screen, news articles, social media posts, and obituaries. My heart sank when I read that Sarah had disappeared 5 years ago under mysterious circumstances, her case unsolved and shrouded in rumors. A cold shiver crawled down my spine as I realized the depth of the enigma I had stumbled into. The objects were not just relics, they were threads pulling me into a web of forgotten lives, fractured memories, and unresolved mysteries. I knew I had to find answers, not just for myself, but for Sarah, and perhaps for the restless spirits entwined with these artifacts. Outside, the city lights blurred into a hazy glow as rain began to fall, tapping against the windows like a mournful rhythm. The night stretched before me, filled with questions that demanded to be answered and secrets waiting to be uncovered. The rain blurred the city lights into shimmering streaks as I sat hunched over my laptop, piecing together fragments of Sarah's life from scattered online posts and faded news clippings. Each article painted a portrait of a woman who had vanished without warning, leaving behind whispers of secrets too heavy to bear. The more I learned, the more the shadows deepened, threads leading to forgotten places, half-remembered rumors, and locked doors that no one dared open. The antiques, her journal, the photograph, the music box, were no mere keepsakes. They were keys, tangible anchors linking me to a mystery that refused to stay buried. I could almost hear the proprietor's warning echo in my mind: these objects carried restless souls, and those souls had chosen me. Compelled by a growing urgency, I visited the city archives the next morning, sifting through old records and police files. Sarah's disappearance was marked by anomalies, unexplained sightings near an abandoned estate, cryptic notes left behind, and a recurring symbol scratched into walls near where she was last seen. That symbol matched none I'd seen before, but its eerie familiarity gnawed at me. As dusk fell, I found myself standing outside a crumbling mansion on the city's edge, the same one from the photograph. Ivy strangled its stone facade, windows boarded and dark, yet a faint glow pulsed from within, as if the house itself breathed in anticipation. The air carried that same scent, the sweet, stagnant perfume that clung to the antiques, and I knew the answers lay inside. Heart hammering, keys clenched tightly in my fist, I stepped toward the heavy front door. Somewhere deep in the shadows, I could feel eyes watching, waiting, and the past ready to unfold. The room trembled with a silence so thick it felt like a living thing, pressing against my skin and settling deep inside my chest. Sarah's translucent figure stood in the corner, radiant yet impossibly fragile, her gaze locked onto mine with an urgency that cut through the haze of confusion clouding my mind. Her lips moved, but no words escaped, only a silent plea carried in the tremble of her eyes. Beside her, the older woman, her features worn with time yet calm and knowing, watched with a quiet sorrow. The grandmother from the music box, a spectral guardian of memories, standing sentinel in this twilight realm between reality and dreams. Behind them, shadowy forms flickered and emerged from the edges of the room, faces and shapes I didn't recognize but felt drawn to, as though tethered to the same unseen thread that bound me. Each figure shimmered with the weight of forgotten stories, of lives interrupted and histories erased. The apartment's walls seemed to stretch and bend, folding inward and outward as if the space itself was breathing with these restless spirits. Time lost all meaning. Past and present collided in a dizzying kaleidoscope of memories, some mine, some not, all tangled in a web too complex to unravel at once. Sarah's gaze softened for a moment, and in that instant, a flicker of clarity pierced the fog. I was no longer merely a spectator in these lives, I was woven into their fabric, a living nexus between worlds. The memories, the artifacts, the haunted objects, they had all been threads pulling me toward this moment, this purpose. A gentle warmth radiated from the grandmother's figure as she stepped forward, her eyes full of compassion and ancient wisdom. Though her voice was silent, her presence spoke volumes, a message of comfort, of guidance, and of the heavy grace that comes with carrying the burdens of those who came before. The room pulsed with energy, a quiet crescendo building beneath the surface, hinting at revelations waiting just beyond reach. The journey ahead would test the very core of my being, forcing me to confront truths that blurred the lines between reality, memory, and the spectral unknown. And as Sarah reached out, her hand trembling like a fragile flame toward mine, I realized this was only the beginning. The tangled stories of love, loss, and redemption were unfolding now, and I was at the heart of it all. The moment Sarah's ethereal hand brushed against mine, a surge of warmth and clarity flooded through me, piercing the haze that had clouded my mind for so long. The room shimmered, the boundaries between past and present, reality and memory, dissolving into a kaleidoscope of vivid images and emotions. Faces, some joyful, others haunted, flickered before me like ghostly photographs brought to life. I saw laughter shared beneath sunlight, tears shed in solitude, moments suspended in time yet heavy with meaning. Each vision was a fragment of a story woven into the tapestry of lives that had converged around me. The grandmother's presence steadied the whirlwind, her silent strength anchoring me as the spectral crowd grew, their forms coalescing into a circle of shared history and unspoken hope. Their eyes held a mixture of gratitude and longing, as if I were both their beacon and their burden. A soft voice echoed, not through the air, but within my mind, carrying a message older than time itself: to heal what is broken, one must first embrace the pieces within. I understood then that my fractured memories were not a curse, but a bridge, a fragile, luminous thread connecting me to those lost and waiting for release. My role was clear: to weave their scattered stories into a whole, to untangle the knots of pain and regret that bound us all. The shadows around me shifted, revealing a path illuminated by faint, shimmering light. It beckoned forward, toward truths buried deep in the forgotten corners of memory and time. With Sarah's hand still in mine, I stepped onto the path, ready to face the shadows and unravel the mysteries that awaited. The spectral path stretched before me like a thread of moonlight woven through the darkness, fragile, yet resolute. With Sarah's hand warm in mine, I stepped forward, each footfall echoing softly in the vastness of this in-between place. The circle of spirits followed silently, their presence a comforting weight that anchored me as shadows danced along the edges of my vision. The path twisted and wound through shifting landscapes, once familiar, now surreal. We passed through sunlit meadows blooming with flowers that shimmered like stars, then into dense forests where ancient trees whispered forgotten secrets. With every step, fragments of forgotten memories surfaced, laughter shared beneath skies now faded, promises made and broken, moments frozen in the delicate balance between joy and sorrow. Soon, the path led to a vast, weathered gate wrought of iron and time-worn wood. Symbols carved deep into its surface pulsed faintly, resonating with the energy of the souls gathered around me. Beyond the gate lay the heart of the mystery, the place where truth, healing, and release awaited. As I reached out to touch the gate, the air thickened, and a presence stirred from the shadows, a figure cloaked in darkness, neither hostile nor kind, but embodying the weight of unspoken judgment and timeless sorrow. Its voice, when it spoke, reverberated inside my mind. To pass beyond is to face the entirety of your soul. Are you prepared to confront the shadows you've hidden and embrace the light you've long denied? My breath caught, the gravity of the moment settling like a stone in my chest. But with Sarah's hand steady in mine and the Spirit's hopeful gaze upon me, I found strength. I am ready, I whispered. The gate creaked open, revealing a realm where past and present intertwined, a place where the fractured pieces of our stories could finally be woven into a tapestry of healing and peace. Together, we stepped forward, into the unknown, toward the redemption waiting at journey's end. The weight in my chest grew heavier, a fierce, primal resistance stirring beneath the allure of their offered paradise. Pride, stubbornness, or perhaps the raw, unyielding need to claim my own story, even with its jagged edges and fractured moments, held me tethered to a truth that was mine alone. Their translucent hands hovered, trembling with longing as they reached out, yearning to enfold me in a reality painted by hope and false comfort. Yet, beneath the seductive promise, I felt the cold shadow of erasure, the quiet death of my own self, dissolved into a beautiful lie. The grandmother's lips parted once more, her voice like a lullaby both soothing and sorrowful. To choose this gift is to lose yourself, she whispered, the words lingering like a fading breath. But to reject it, is to embrace the unknown. Sarah's gaze softened, a silent plea that held both love and sorrow. The other figures pressed closer, their forms shimmering with a fragile urgency, yet respectful of the fragile boundary I held fast. My heart pounded in my ears as the silence stretched taut, a moment suspended between surrender and defiance. I took a steadying breath and stepped back, shaking my head slowly. No, I said quietly but firmly. I won't trade my life, my true self, for memories that aren't mine. I'll carry the loneliness, the pain, the real, the whole of who I am, even if it means walking through the darkness alone. The figure's faces softened, an understanding dawning in their spectral eyes. They did not vanish in anger or despair but receded gently, leaving the room lighter, as if a long-held tension had finally released. The music box fell silent. The photograph's glow dimmed. The journal's pages fluttered closed. Alone once more, I felt the quiet strength of survival, not the warmth of borrowed love, but the fierce, unyielding light of self-acceptance. The journey ahead would be long and uncertain, but it would be mine. The silence that followed was profound, not empty, but filled with a gentle, steady pulse, like the slow beating of a heart coming to rest after a long storm. I sat back, the weight of the music box, photograph, and journal finally lifting from my hands as if they too recognized the choice I had made. For the first time in weeks, the room felt real, solid and grounded in the present moment. The shadows receded to their rightful places, no longer twisting into shapes of longing or despair. My breath slowed, steadying in rhythm with the steady hum of the world outside my window. In that quiet, I felt something stir deep within, a fragile spark of hope, the whispered promise that even in solitude, life held meaning and possibility. I was not alone, not truly. The memories I carried, both painful and joyous, were mine, and that truth was a foundation upon which I could build. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with unknown challenges and moments of loneliness, but also the chance for genuine connection, growth, and healing. I resolved to seek out the light in my own story, to honor both the scars and the beauty woven through my life. And as dawn broke, spilling soft gold across my apartment, I felt ready to face the day, not as a shadow of borrowed memories, but as the whole, imperfect, resilient person I was always meant to be. With the first gentle light of dawn filtering through my window, a quiet resolve settled deep within me. The haunting whispers had faded, replaced by a newfound clarity, a silent promise that the path ahead, though uncertain, was mine to walk in full ownership of my story. I rose from my chair, feeling the solid ground beneath my feet for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The music box sat closed on the table, the photograph and journal resting side by side, no longer vessels of spectral illusions but reminders of a journey through shadows and back. Determined to reclaim my life, I began reaching out, to old friends, to family members I had pushed away, to communities I'd long avoided. Each conversation was tentative, raw, a fragile bridge between isolation and connection. But with every shared story, every heartfelt apology and smile, I felt the walls around me crumble. Days turned into weeks. I rediscovered simple joys, morning coffee with a neighbor, the feel of fresh air on my skin during evening walks, laughter shared over small triumphs and setbacks. The past still whispered softly, but it no longer held me captive. Instead, it became a thread woven into the fabric of a richer, fuller existence. One afternoon, as I wandered through a local park, sunlight filtering through the leaves like scattered gold, I felt a lightness in my chest, a quiet peace born not from borrowed memories, but from the truth I had chosen to embrace. The keys, once heavy with unseen burdens, lay on my shelf, a reminder of the shadows I'd faced and the strength I'd found. I knew their call might come again, to others brave enough to answer, but for now, my story was mine alone. And in that knowing, I found freedom. Your loneliness is yours, raw, unfiltered, and true. Your struggles, your victories, your flaws, they belong only to you, woven into the unique fabric of your existence. No borrowed happiness, no spectral illusion, could ever replace the depth and authenticity of that. As you met the gaze of each translucent figure, you felt the weight of their offer, the life they longed to share, the false warmth they hoped would pull you from your solitude. Yet, you found the courage to speak your truth, steady and clear, while you were grateful for their gift, you would not trade your reality for their borrowed dreams. Relief softened their ethereal faces, a silent thank you for your strength. They had been prisoners, offering you freedom in exchange for their own release, but your refusal was a balm, a chance for their own rest. With care, you gathered the music box, the photograph, and the journal, anchors of their existence, and placed them in the wooden box your father once gave you. You promised the spirits you would safeguard their memories until you could find a way to set them free without losing yourself. One last farewell came from Sarah, her ghostly lips pressed to her palm, a silent kiss cast across the room, her hand extended in a goodbye both beautiful and heartbreaking. Then, slowly, they vanished. Morning broke like a gentle awakening. The objects sat silently in their wooden prison, ordinary once more, yet their presence lingered, a quiet heartbeat beneath the surface. Days of research unearthed the truth behind Meridian Antiques, a family legacy entwined with mysterious objects that altered lives, some for joy, some swallowed by oblivion. Stories whispered of customers transformed or erased, all linked to the shop's uncanny allure. Returning to Crescent Street, the shop had vanished as if never there, leaving only faint shadows etched in brick. Yet, the choice remained, with each dawn, with every heartbeat, to embrace your authentic self, imperfect and real. 3 months passed. The spirits stirred at night, but no longer as tempters. They watched over you like guardians, silent friends reminding you of your strength. You began rebuilding, joining a book club, laughing through cooking class mishaps, learning that true connection demands courage but yields a richness no illusion can match. And in those quiet, twilight hours, you feel their presence, not as chains, but as gentle reminders of love, loss, and the power to choose your own path. They gave you a gift beyond measure, the strength to say no to false comfort, and yes to your own unfolding story. The dawn of a new chapter crept quietly into my life, subtle yet profound. The shadows that once haunted the corners of my mind now seemed less like threats and more like remnants of a past I had the strength to face. Each day was a small victory, a testament to the resilience found in owning my truth. I found solace in the rhythms of ordinary life, the hum of morning coffee brewing, the comfort of well-worn books, the laughter shared with new friends who saw me not as a collection of lost memories, but as a whole person. The kitchen no longer echoed with silence but with the sounds of experiments and occasional burnt dinners, moments rich with imperfect joy. In time, the wooden box holding the music box, photograph, and journal became a quiet altar to the journey I'd endured, a symbol not of captivity, but of the choice I had made. I placed it on a shelf bathed in sunlight, a reminder that while the past shapes us, it does not define us. The whispers from the spirits no longer stirred fear but brought a gentle reassurance, like the distant echo of a lullaby reminding me I was never truly alone. Their presence became a quiet companionship, a blessing rather than a burden. One evening, as autumn leaves drifted outside my window, I sat with a journal of my own making. I wrote not to escape, but to remember, to capture the truth of my days, the light and the shadows alike. Writing became a bridge, connecting me to myself and the world in a way I had never known. The road ahead remained uncertain, but I faced it with open eyes and a heart ready to embrace whatever came. The strength to choose authenticity over illusion had gifted me freedom to live, to love, and to grow on my own terms. And in that freedom, I found peace. The flickering candles formed a haunting corridor, their cold flames casting eerie shadows that danced along the towering trunks. Each step I took echoed louder in the unnatural silence, as if the very forest was holding its breath, watching, waiting. The rational part of my mind screamed at me to turn back, to abandon this macabre procession of lights. But my feet moved forward, drawn by a force I couldn't name, something ancient, patient, and impossibly compelling. As I ventured deeper, the temperature dropped sharply. My breath frosted in the air, mingling with the steady rhythm of my heartbeat pounding against my ribs. The candle's glow seemed to pulse in time, a sinister heartbeat marking the path. Suddenly, the forest around me shifted. The trees thickened into grotesque shapes, faces twisted in silent screams, limbs like grasping claws. The path narrowed, forcing me to walk between these living nightmares. Whispers began to swirl, soft at first, like the rustle of leaves, then rising into murmurs laden with sorrow and warning. I strained to catch the words, but they twisted into a language I couldn't understand, half-remembered chants from a forgotten time. Ahead, a clearing emerged bathed in the pale light of a swollen moon. In its center stood an ancient stone altar, draped with faded cloth and surrounded by more candles, each flamed the same eerie cold fire that defied nature. Atop the altar lay a weathered book bound in cracked leather, its pages inscribed with symbols that writhed as I looked upon them. A chill gripped my spine as I realized this was no ordinary place. This was a threshold, between worlds, between time and memory. My instincts screamed to flee, but the candle's unyielding light beckoned me closer. Each step toward the altar felt like crossing deeper into a realm where the laws of reality blurred, and the shadows whispered secrets older than the forest itself. And in that moment, I understood, I had been led here not by chance, but by something waiting patiently in the dark, ready to reveal truths that could either save or consume me. A chill that pierced deeper than the October night settled over me as her silent words filled my mind. The weight of generations, the sorrow and yearning etched into the very air, pressed down with a force that threatened to crush my spirit. My legs trembled, but I knew I couldn't refuse this calling, their vigil was my burden now. I took a shaky breath, the icy air biting at my lungs, and stepped forward into the circle. The cold radiating from the spectral figure surrounded me like a living frost, each step crunching softly on frozen grass beneath my boots. As I began the first counterclockwise lap, their eyes followed me with a mix of hope and exhaustion that nearly broke my resolve. The words floated into my consciousness, an ancient incantation, its syllables strange and melodic, echoing from a time lost beneath centuries of shadow. The second lap brought a deeper understanding of the weight I bore. The candlelight flickered, casting long, trembling shadows that danced like restless spirits eager for release. My voice wavered, but the words steadied me, binding me to the solemn task at hand. By the third lap, the air around me thickened, vibrating with a potent energy that prickled my skin and sent shards of light flickering through the darkness. The circle's chill became almost unbearable, yet I pressed on, driven by the silent pleas etched in their weary eyes. At last, I stood in the center of the clearing, the circle of candles burning fiercely despite the cold. The sequence of candles I needed to extinguish appeared before me in my mind's eye, a ritual dance of light and shadow, life and release. I bent low and blew out the first flame. A sigh like 1,000 whispered thanks brushed past my ears. The second candle flickered and died, followed by a crescendo of faint, ethereal voices rising in harmony, a chorus of souls eager for freedom. The final candle flickered, resisted, then surrendered to the breath of release. A wave of warmth surged through the clearing, melting the frost, and for the first time in generations, the spirits began to dissolve, softly, like mist lifting at dawn. Their expressions transformed from weariness to peace, gratitude shining in their eyes as they faded into the light. The cemetery's oppressive silence gave way to the gentle rustle of wind through trees, the distant call of awakening birds. Alone, I stood in the clearing, heart pounding and breath ragged, the candle's cold flames extinguished and the ancient vigil finally ended. As the first golden rays of dawn kissed the horizon, I felt a profound connection, not just to these souls, but to the fragile thread of life, memory, and choice that binds us all. The wind howled through the skeletal trees as the weight of the decision pressed heavily on my chest. The frosted cemetery, bathed in the pale glow of flickering candles, felt like the threshold of two worlds, one of release, the other of unfathomable darkness lurking just beyond the veil. My breath crystallized in the icy air, each exhale a fragile wisp fading into the night. The spirits circled me, their forms wavering between solidity and ethereality, faces etched with hope and desperation. Time itself seemed to fracture, minutes stretched and snapped as the first blush of dawn threatened the horizon. The final candle flickered stubbornly atop the weathered headstone, its flame a silent guardian of ancient pacts and forgotten fears. As I reached out, the flood of visions overwhelmed me, the ritual that bound these souls, the vigilant watch they kept to protect the living, and the lurking menace poised to cross the threshold if I chose freedom. My fingers trembled, numb and clumsy, yet resolved. The weight of generations' trust bore down on me, and with a steadying breath, I blew out the flame. A shudder rippled through the earth, the air charged with a sudden surge of power. The spirits around me gasped, their forms brightening, becoming lighter, more translucent, then dissolving like mist caught in the morning sun. But the silence that followed was anything but peaceful. From the shadows beyond the iron fence, a darkness stirred, ancient and hungry. The barrier that had held it at bay for centuries had fallen. I stood alone, heart pounding, breath ragged, as the forest exhaled a cold, unnatural breath. The night had ended, but the true reckoning was only beginning. The words on the page were hauntingly vivid, each sentence unraveling the layers of my subconscious terror with unsettling clarity. The drowning dream, the cold water engulfing me, the panic clawing at my chest, the silence beneath the surface, was no longer just a nightmare. It was a message, a warning etched in ink by a hand that wasn't mine but somehow knew my deepest fears. I hesitated, the leather-bound journal heavy in my hands like a stone soaked in dark secrets. Every instinct screamed to close it and destroy it, yet the pull of the unknown was irresistible. Each page promised a deeper descent into the labyrinth of my own mind, where shadows whispered truths I wasn't ready to face but could no longer ignore. That night, as darkness fell and the house settled into silence, I lay awake with the journal beside my bed. The dreams returned, more vivid, more urgent, doors lining endless hallways, beckoning figures, the scent of decayed flowers thick in the air. I could almost hear the faint scratching sounds from the pages, like fingernails tapping from beyond the veil. I knew then that the journal was not just a record but a key, unlocking not only memories but a doorway to something lurking just beyond perception. Its origins, its author, and its purpose became the burning questions that would consume me in the days ahead. Its gaze held me captive, empty yet all-consuming, like staring into a void that threatened to swallow every shred of light and hope. The air around the figure pulsed with an unnatural coldness, seeping into my bones and freezing my very soul. I wanted to scream, to run, to shatter the fragile veil that separated me from this nightmare, but my body betrayed me, rooted in place by a terror older than memory. The figure's mouth opened, but no sound came, only a suffocating silence filled the room, pressing against my eardrums like the weight of 1,000 forgotten sorrows. Suddenly, the pages of the diary fluttered violently, as if caught in a tempestuous wind. Words appeared and vanished in rapid succession, forming a maddening puzzle I couldn't decipher. Then, a phrase etched itself clearly across the paper. The boundary thins. The watcher's hunger. Write or become undone. Panic surged through me, but beneath it simmered a grim resolve. The diary was no mere journal, it was a conduit, a trap, and a warning all at once. Its insatiable hunger for words, for stories, seemed tied to the very fabric of my existence. As days bled into restless nights, the haunting escalated. Shadows flickered just beyond vision, whispers curled around closed doors, and the line between dreams and waking life blurred into a seamless nightmare. I found myself scribbling frantic notes, desperate to stay ahead of the insidious force clawing at the edges of my mind. But with every word written, the presence grew stronger, until one night, it manifested fully, stepping through the thinning boundary between worlds. The pale figure reached out with a hand that shimmered like fractured glass, and I understood, this was not just a visitor from dreams, but a herald of something far darker. My sanity, my reality, and perhaps even my very soul now hung in the balance. The glass eyes seemed alive, pulsing with an eerie light that flickered beneath their polished surfaces. I could feel their gaze piercing through me, unsettling and unyielding, as if they held secrets that spanned centuries, secrets I was not meant to uncover. The velvet-lined box was unnervingly heavy, as though weighted not just by glass and wood, but by the unseen burden of countless watchful souls. A sudden chill swept through the room, the warm morning air retreating like a tide before an impending storm. The rational part of my mind scrambled to find explanations, a trick of the light, an elaborate forgery, but deep down, I knew this was no ordinary package. The eyes belonged to something ancient, something sentient. I set the box carefully on my kitchen table, unable to tear my gaze away from those shifting irises. Whispers began to rise around me, not from any person, but from the very air, curling and twisting like smoke in a breeze. Words formed and dissolved before I could grasp them, echoes of forgotten languages pressing against the walls of my mind. My hands trembled as I reached out, the pull irresistible. The moment my fingers brushed the cold glass, a wave of images crashed into me, visions of distant lands bathed in twilight, of shadowed figures watching from hidden places, and eyes, always eyes, watching, waiting. The apartment darkened, the edges of reality blurring as the eyes seemed to multiply in my vision. They swirled around me, circling like phantoms, each filled with stories of sorrow, vigilance, and eternal watchfulness. I was not just holding a box of glass, I was holding a key to an ancient power, and a responsibility I had never sought. Fear and fascination warred within me as I pondered what these eyes demanded, what they would see, what they would reveal, and what darkness might be unleashed if I dared to look too deeply. Their eyes, or rather, the lack of them. Hollow sockets stared blankly ahead, empty yet somehow piercing. Their presence was heavy, a silent weight pressing on my chest that made every breath a struggle. These were watchers, guardians, or perhaps prisoners, entities tethered to the glass eyes, trapped between worlds. I stumbled back, heart pounding, knocking the box off the counter. It hit the floor with a dull thud, the velvet lining spilling open, and the eyes scattered across the hardwood like fallen stars. Yet, instead of chaos, an eerie calm descended. The translucent figures ceased their drifting and turned their gaze toward the scattered orbs. Slowly, as if drawn by an unseen thread, they knelt down and reached out with spectral hands, touching the glass eyes with reverence and longing. A chorus of whispers filled the room, unintelligible but charged with emotion, sorrow, yearning, and an unfulfilled purpose. I wanted to flee, to barricade myself away from this creeping nightmare, but my legs refused. The apartment had transformed into a liminal space, a threshold between life and something far older, darker, and incomprehensible. The eyes pulsed once more, casting prismatic patterns on the walls, and I knew then that I was no longer merely an observer. I was a participant in a story that stretched back centuries, woven with grief, watchfulness, and perhaps a chance at redemption. The glass eyes were not just artifacts. They were vessels, carriers of souls and memories that demanded to be seen, understood, and finally, released. Marcus's nights grew darker and more restless as the watchers became more present, their silent vigil pressing ever closer. He found himself drawn into researching Klaus Zimmermann and Harold Reeves, desperate for any clue that might explain the burden he now carried. One evening, as rain tapped a steady rhythm against his apartment window, a revelation came. An obscure journal entry from a forgotten historian mentioned a peculiar legend about Zimmermann's glass eyes, crafted not merely for the deceased, but to trap malevolent spirits seeking passage into the living world. The eyes were said to serve as sentinels, eternal observers warding off darkness, but at a terrible cost. The souls of those who looked upon them too long became intertwined with the watchers, bound to the eye's eternal vigil. Haunted by this knowledge, Marcus resolved to break the curse. But freeing the watchers wouldn't be simple, it required returning the eyes to their rightful resting place, a lost crypt deep beneath an abandoned German chapel. With every passing night, the watchers grew restless, their empty gazes shifting from silent observation to urgent pleading. They sought release, but also protection, for without the eyes, the darkness waiting beyond would surge forth, unstoppable. Marcus faced a harrowing choice: remain captive to the eyes' haunting watch or venture into unknown dangers to return them and seal away the darkness forever. The path ahead was perilous and uncertain, but the burden of the watchers was his to bear. Marcus packed a small bag under the oppressive weight of mounting dread, each item carefully chosen for what little comfort or protection it might offer. The ancient glass eyes lay wrapped in soft cloth, their silent gaze pressing into his soul even through layers of fabric. He boarded a flight to Germany, the journey a blur of restless flights, anxious waits, and fragmented sleep haunted by whispers only he could hear. When he finally arrived in the shadowed town near the chapel, the air was thick with mist and memories, echoes of long-forgotten prayers and silent laments. The chapel itself was a decaying monument to time's relentless passage, its once majestic spires crumbling beneath layers of ivy and neglect. Marcus felt the eye's power intensify as he crossed the threshold, the temperature dropping sharply, his breath fogging in the stale air. Within the crypt below, darkness swallowed him whole. Ancient stone walls bore inscriptions in a language lost to modern tongues. The watcher's whispers crescendoed, mingling with the rhythmic drip of unseen water and the distant echoes of forgotten chants. Marcus knew the ritual to return the eyes required more than physical presence. It demanded an offering of memory and will, a confrontation with the darkness bound within the glass. As he prepared to place each eye into its carved niche, shadows coalesced, forms darker than absence, twisting and writhing in fury at their imminent release. The watchers rallied around Marcus, their hollow eyes blazing with a light that defied the consuming darkness. The battle was not just of strength but of spirit and resolve. With every eye restored, Marcus felt fragments of the watchers' burdens lift, their forms growing lighter, more peaceful. At the final eye, the darkness unleashed a roar that shook the crypt's foundations, but Marcus stood firm, chanting the ancient words he'd painstakingly learned. When the last eye found its resting place, silence fell, a deep, cleansing silence filled with the promise of peace. Marcus emerged from the crypt changed, the watchers freed, the darkness sealed away, for now. But he knew the eye's burden was never truly gone. Somewhere, in shadowed corners of the world, the watchers waited for the next soul to bear their vigil. His home was reportedly filled with dozens of similar glass eyes, scattered across tables and shelves like a morbid shrine. The coroner's report mentioned extreme psychological trauma, but whispered rumors in the city spoke of a darker cause, voices from beyond the veil, incessant watchers demanding release. I knew I was racing against time. The apparitions grew restless, more defined, more insistent. They no longer lingered in the periphery but manifested fully at the edge of my vision, even occasionally standing directly before me, though I remained frozen, unable to look directly into their hollow sockets. One night, as thunder rumbled low and the storm clouds swallowed the moon, the woman in the Victorian dress appeared at my bedside again. This time, her lips moved clearly, and the voice thundered inside my mind, no longer a whisper but a roar, "You must return us. Set us free, or join us in the endless vigil." My body trembled with icy dread. The only path forward was clear, I had to journey to the chapel hidden in the German countryside, to return the eyes and break the curse. Failure meant losing myself to the eternal watch, becoming another prisoner of those glass orbs. The weight of destiny pressed down as I packed my bag, knowing that whatever awaited me would change everything. The silence that followed was profound, a void heavy with absence, yet strangely liberating. Marcus sat alone in his apartment, the air now feeling less oppressive but charged with a subtle tension, as if the unseen boundaries between worlds had thinned, never to fully heal. He often found himself caught in fleeting moments of doubt. Were the eyes truly destroyed? Or had he merely scattered their essence, dispersing the watchers into fragments that still lingered in the shadows of his home? At times, the reflections in mirrors and windows seemed to ripple with ghostly whispers, and the familiar scent of old earth and forgotten memories would drift faintly on the breeze. Sleep remained elusive, not from terror now, but from the persistent knowledge that the veil was thin, that other realities brushed against his own, unseen yet palpable. Marcus knew this was not an end, but a pause. Somewhere, in the dim corridors between worlds, the watchers waited, patient and eternal, their stories carried in fragments of glass, waiting for the next chapter to be written. And he wondered, with a chill deep in his bones, who would be next to open that box. The air in the room thickened with a sorrow so palpable that it pressed against my chest, each breath becoming a labor. The lighthouse's beam swept again, this time focusing on the window beside my bed. Through the veil of fractured light, I glimpsed a child, a small boy, no older than 8, standing alone, clutching a battered wooden toy boat. His eyes, though faint, met mine with a mixture of hope and despair. The silence around him was broken only by the distant crash of waves, the ocean's eternal lament. Night after night, the spectral theater continued. Scenes unfolded with heartbreaking clarity, each more vivid and harrowing than the last. I saw fishermen braving storms, their faces etched with grit and determination, only to vanish into the merciless sea. I saw a woman waiting on the rocky cliffs, her gaze forever fixed on the horizon, clutching a faded letter. The village itself seemed frozen in a moment of tragedy, caught between the relentless tides of time and the weight of forgotten grief. Compelled by a force I couldn't resist, I began to research Beacon's Rest. The village had been decimated by a catastrophic storm nearly a century ago, swallowing ships and lives with ruthless hunger. The lighthouse, once a beacon of hope, had crumbled, leaving behind only its ghostly pulse, a desperate signal sent across time and space, seeking remembrance, seeking justice, seeking release. But as I delved deeper, I sensed something darker. The light was not just a call for aid, it was a warning. The phantoms that danced within its glow were tethered by sorrow, yes, but also by something vengeful, something that refused to rest until the wrongs of the past were made right. One night, as the beam swept across my room, a voice, raw, weathered, and trembling with the weight of decades, whispered directly into my mind. It was the captain of a lost ship, recounting a betrayal that had doomed his crew. The villagers were not merely victims of nature's wrath but pawns in a cruel game of greed and deceit. The lighthouse light was their story, their legacy, and their curse. And I was the unwilling audience, drawn into a narrative I couldn't escape. The ocean roared outside, indifferent yet alive with secrets. The beam continued its silent vigil, cutting through stone and shadow, carrying the voices of the lost, and the weight of a truth that demanded to be heard. The keeper's voice trembled with sorrow as he recounted how the ritual, meant to preserve hope and guidance, had instead become a prison. The light, once a beacon for safe passage, transformed into a spectral trap, a silent cage for the souls bound to the village. They relived their final days, their happiest memories, and their deepest regrets, all while the outside world moved on, oblivious to the suffering held within that unforgiving glow. As I ascended further, the whispers grew louder, overlapping voices weaving a tapestry of longing and despair. The spiral staircase seemed to stretch endlessly upward, each step heavier than the last, as if I were climbing through the very fabric of time itself. The walls pulsed with the rhythm of lost lives, and shadows flickered just beyond the reach of my flashlight, teasing glimpses of faces frozen in moments both joyous and tragic. Near the top, the narrow corridor opened onto a chamber housing the lighthouse's core, a vast, ancient lens suspended like an eye gazing into eternity. The light source itself was a flickering flame encased in glass, casting undulating patterns of light and shadow that danced like restless spirits on the walls. Here, the presence was overwhelming, a pressure that pressed not just on my body but on my very soul. Suddenly, a figure stepped forward, an ethereal woman clad in a faded sailor's uniform, her eyes glowing softly beneath a spectral cap. Her gaze met mine, and without words, I felt her story wash over me, a lost lover, a ship claimed by the sea, a promise broken, and a love frozen in time by the same ritual that ensnared the village. She reached out, her hand passing through mine like a whisper of cold wind, and I knew then what the keeper's ritual had truly become, a desperate attempt to hold on to what was lost, to deny the flow of time, and in doing so, condemn an entire community to eternal stasis. But amid the sorrow, there was a flicker of hope. The keeper's voice returned, urging me to release them, not through force, but through remembrance and understanding. To let the light guide the spirits onward, allowing the village to finally rest and the beam to fade. I stood in the chamber, the dawn's first light creeping through cracks in the stone, and I made a choice, to let go. As I whispered words of farewell, the lighthouse's glow softened, the spectral figures gathered close, their faces serene as they drifted toward the rising sun. The beam's rhythmic sweep slowed, then ceased, leaving the chamber bathed in gentle morning light. Outside, the village seemed to breathe anew. The stale weight lifted. The sea's song returned, wild and free. And I knew that some lights, no matter how bright, must be allowed to fade so that new dawns may rise. The reflection was fragmented, faces of people I'd never met, moments I hadn't lived, emotions both alien and achingly familiar flickering in my eyes. It was a mirror not of my present self, but of the many lives contained within this luminous prison. The weight of what was asked pressed down on me, not just as a choice but as a surrender of everything I was, everything I could be. A silence fell heavy, the kind that fills every crack in your bones. The spirits, once distant, now seemed almost tangible, their longing radiating like a cold fire. The old keeper placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. "We've waited long for this moment," he whispered inside my mind. "No one chooses lightly. But whatever you decide, know this: freedom demands sacrifice." My fingers brushed against the cold control lever. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, drowning out the whispered histories and unseen eyes. For a moment, the urge to live beyond the past, to let go of this endless looping nightmare, consumed me. But then, clarity bloomed in the midst of despair. To abandon this place without care would be to erase centuries of human experience, to sever the fragile tether that still bound this village to the living world. To become the keeper was not merely a sentence, it was a commitment to remembrance, to guardianship, to honoring lives that would otherwise be lost in the void. I pulled the lever. The lighthouse's beam softened, then faded, as if exhaling the accumulated memories in one great, shimmering pulse. Time itself seemed to ripple. I felt myself unraveling and weaving anew, tethered now to this place, a sentinel in the dance between memory and oblivion. Outside, the village held its breath, suspended between the worlds, no longer fading, no longer trapped, simply waiting. And in that waiting, I found my purpose. The past was not a prison but a sanctuary, and I, its reluctant guardian, would tend the light until the end of time. Their wooden limbs twitched with unnatural life, jerking and weaving in a dance that no puppeteer could have choreographed. Each marionette was grotesquely beautiful, faces carved with exquisite detail, eyes that glinted like polished stones, expressions frozen between joy and torment. The air hummed with a low, vibrating energy that seemed to pulse from the stage itself. I stepped closer, heart pounding, as the marionettes performed a scene that sent chills spiraling down my spine. Their movements told a story of love and loss, betrayal and vengeance, of lives trapped between strings and shadows. I recognized faces among them, distorted and warped but undeniably familiar. Friends, family, even myself, or versions of me caught in this macabre theater. The strings, however, told a different tale. They weren't attached to any visible puppeteer. Instead, they stretched upward, vanishing into the thick darkness of the fly gallery as if pulled by unseen hands. It felt as if the theater itself were the master, weaving its own narrative with sinister intent. The whispered voices began then, swirling around me like the dust motes, voices from the past mingling with something far older, murmurs of forgotten actors, lost audiences, and vengeful spirits ensnared in this spectral performance. They begged for release, for an end to the eternal show. My skin prickled, and a cold sweat broke across my forehead. The Orpheum was no mere abandoned theater. It was a prison of memories, a stage where lost souls replayed their final acts endlessly, their lives bound by strings of unresolved pain. I knew then that my investigation had become something far darker than uncovering structural faults or debunking superstition. The play had begun, and I was the unwilling audience, perhaps soon to be the next performer trapped in its eternal scene. A chill swept through the theater, settling like a fog in my bones. The puppets, so delicate, so lifeless in appearance, held within them a sinister intelligence far beyond anything I had anticipated. The scene before me was no mere reenactment. It was a glimpse into the future, a prophecy etched in wood and string. My breath caught as the woman puppet turned slowly, eyes wide with terror, before disappearing behind the door as if swallowed by darkness itself. The marionette me stood frozen for a moment, then turned sharply back toward the stage, where a new figure awaited, taller, darker, and cloaked in shadow. This newcomer's presence pressed on the air, oppressive and final. The performance shifted once again, the marionette me walking deliberately into the shadowy figure's embrace, hands extended as if to plead, or perhaps to submit. The silence in the theater deepened, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for me to make sense of the unfolding nightmare. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, my eyes wide and locked onto the puppets. The uncanny precision of their movements, the eerie foreknowledge of events yet to come, it was impossible to ignore the chilling message. I was being drawn into a story not of my own choosing, a narrative already written in threads of wood and shadow. the temperature in the room plummeted, my breath fogging in the icy air as the marionettes gathered closer, their eyeless faces turned toward me in mute anticipation. The stage was set, and the curtain was rising on a drama where I was no longer the observer, but the unwilling actor, trapped in a play that threatened to consume my very soul. The weight of the marionette's gaze pressed down on me like the thick velvet curtains of the Orpheum itself, closing in with an inevitability I could no longer deny. My steps toward the exit felt heavy, as if invisible strings tugged at my limbs, binding me to a performance already written. The theater, once a place of silent observation, now breathed with a sinister sentience, each creak of the floorboards echoing like the tick of a clock counting down to a fate I couldn't escape. I paused at the threshold, the dim glow from the stage casting elongated shadows across the lobby, where countless puppets sat frozen in their last poses, their eyes wide and hollow. For a moment, I wished to turn and run, to break free from this scripted destiny. But the marionette detective's eyes, those sharp, accusing wooden eyes, burned into my soul, and I knew that escape was a chapter already closed. My breath hitched as the air grew colder, the scent of old wood and forgotten stories thickening like fog. The marionette's whispered motions swirled around me, a silent chorus urging me forward into the unfolding nightmare. Every heartbeat matched the rhythm of the dance they'd choreographed for me, a macabre ballet where free will was merely an illusion. And so, with a heavy heart and trembling hands, I stepped beyond the door, no longer just a visitor or witness, but an actor in a drama that had begun long before I entered, and which might never truly end. The room seemed to tilt, the edges of reality blurring like wet paint running down a canvas. My fingers itched as if the carved patterns had burrowed beneath my skin, embedding themselves into the very fibers of my being. The mask's weight lingered in my hands, heavier now, charged with a silent menace that felt alive and watching. Sleep that night was a fractured affair. Dreams refused the usual sanctuary and instead became a gallery of shadows. Faces from the masks twisted would appear, whispering secrets in tongues I didn't understand, their voices both soothing and maddening. I awoke drenched in cold sweat, the patterns on my face throbbing with a pulse of their own. The mask was no mere artifact, it was a vessel, a bridge between worlds I was only beginning to glimpse. Days blurred into nights as I found myself drawn back to it, the mask calling with a siren's persistence. Each time I wore it, fragments of memories not my own flooded my mind, laughter in forgotten halls, the sharp scent of candle wax mingling with despair, cold hands reaching out from darkness. I was becoming a vessel for something ancient, something that thrived in the spaces between waking and dreaming. The mask's smile haunted me, a promise and a curse intertwined. It was a key, but to what door, I dared not guess. My reflection showed a man unmoored, caught between the world he knew and a deeper, more tangled reality. Yet beneath the terror, a flicker of understanding took root. Some masks are not worn to hide but to reveal. And in wearing it, I had been seen. Now, I had to choose, succumb to the mask's whispers, or fight to reclaim the life that still flickered faintly beneath its shadow. Their faces were mirrors reflecting fragments of a life I didn't fully remember living, or perhaps one I never had. Yet each carried a weight of truth that crushed me. The air thickened, and the mask seemed to pulse in my hands, drawing a slow, steady rhythm that synchronized with my heartbeat. I hesitated, knowing that to wear it again was to surrender a part of myself, to invite those haunting faces closer. But the ache inside me, the desperate need for peace, pushed me forward. Sliding the mask over my face, the world snapped into a dissonant clarity. The room dissolved into shadows and light, and I was no longer alone. The apparitions gathered, their eyeless faces turning toward me with silent, searching intensity. Whispers wrapped around my mind like a cold breeze, speaking in riddles and forgotten tongues. My vision blurred and sharpened simultaneously, revealing scenes hidden beneath the veneer of reality, past regrets, lost loves, lives unlived. In that moment, I understood the mask was both prison and key, a vessel holding the echoes of those who'd lost themselves, and a path that might lead me beyond their endless torment. But the question lingered, heavy as the carved wood against my skin, was I stepping into freedom, or sealing my fate as one more ghost among the many? The silence in that museum's basement is thick, almost palpable, as if the air itself holds its breath in anticipation. The mask lies dormant, its carved face resting in shadow, yet the faintest pulse seems to echo from its wood, a heartbeat that never truly ceases. It waits for the next touch, the next face to claim, the next soul to become part of its endless story. Sometimes, late at night, the custodians whisper of a feeling, an unseen gaze following their every step, a subtle shift in the shadows near the storage room. They speak quietly of dreams filled with faces not their own, eyes full of desperate hope. The mask is more than an artifact, it is a vessel of trapped lives, a prison of memories that bleed between worlds. And somewhere, beyond the reach of reason and light, the cycle continues, a haunting reminder that some objects carry not just history, but a living, restless hunger. A hunger that feeds on curiosity, on loneliness, on the fragile desire for connection, binding victims into its woven tapestry of lost identities, each waiting for the chance to warn the next. Yet within this dark inheritance, there is a sliver of hope, those who recognize the trap, who fight with every fiber to reclaim themselves, and who choose to break the chain, even if only for a moment. The mask waits. And so do the stories, whispering softly, beckoning cautiously, inviting those brave enough to listen to find the truth hidden behind the wood, beneath the painted smile, and within the eyes that never close. Each mirror held a fragment of my past, scenes frozen in time yet filled with movement, memories playing out as if I were both spectator and actor. I saw my first awkward attempts at love, my late-night study sessions fueled by caffeine and desperation, friends laughing in rooms that now only existed in shadow. These glimpses weren't static reflections, they were alive, shifting with subtle changes as if the past was not fixed but fluid, responding to my presence. I became obsessed. I returned to those mirrors again and again, compelled to watch these lost moments unfold, to glimpse the person I had been and the life I had left behind. Yet with each visit, the hotel's atmosphere grew heavier, more oppressive, as if the building itself was feeding on my fixation. The mirrors no longer showed just memories, they started showing versions of me that shouldn't exist, a me who made different choices, smiled more easily, loved deeply, or walked away from pain. Versions that looked at me with pity or judgment, as if asking why I had strayed from their paths. One night, as the hotel's ancient clock chimed midnight, I approached the largest mirror at the end of the corridor. This one was grander than the rest, framed in ornate gold leaf, its surface nearly perfect despite decades of neglect. My reflection stepped forward from the glass, breaking the barrier between reflection and reality. It smiled, a cold, knowing smile, and whispered my name without moving its lips. Fear rooted me in place as the corridor seemed to stretch and warp, the walls bending inward like the closing pages of a book. The mirrors around me began to shimmer, the faces within multiplying, their eyes locking onto me with an urgent, haunting plea. I realized then that these reflections were not mere memories, but echoes of choices not taken, lives unlived, and paths left unexplored, trapped within the glass, desperate for release. The hotel was not just a decaying relic, it was a prison, a nexus where the past and present collided, where forgotten selves lingered in limbo. And I was being drawn deeper into its web, pulled toward a choice no one had warned me about, to step fully into the past and become another lost reflection, or to fight for the fragile life I still had. The mirrors whispered their secrets, waiting patiently for me to decide. The whispers wove through the cracked plaster and faded wallpaper like secrets trapped behind a veil. I couldn't tell if they were pleading or warning, if they were fragments of memory or something far more sinister. The words felt both ancient and achingly familiar, as if they belonged not just to this place but to every step I'd ever taken, every choice I'd ever made. Sleep was no longer an escape. Each night, the voices grew louder, swirling around me until my dreams became the hallway itself, endless, fractured, and lined with those mirrors. Faces emerged from the glass, not just reflections, but echoes with will and desire. The younger versions of myself, now fully aware, reached out, beckoning me forward, begging me to step through the fractured timeline and reclaim the futures they had lost. Fear twisted in my gut, yet beneath it lay a strange pull, a yearning to cross the boundary and be whole again, to live in the moments those mirrors promised, to reclaim the light of possibility that now felt so distant. But at what cost? The hotel was no longer just a place to stay. It had become a crucible where the past and present clashed, where memories lived and died in suspended animation. And somewhere deep in those mirrors, my own reflection waited, not just to be seen, but to be chosen. The choice hung heavy like the thick, stale air in the hallway, to surrender to the ghosts of my former selves or to fight for the fragile thread of the life I still held. The mirrors whispered still, patient and unyielding, as I prepared to walk the corridor one last time. The voices echoed in the silence of my room, a chaotic symphony of regrets and hopes, each pleading for a chance to rewrite the story I thought I was living. Exhaustion blurred the lines between my reality and theirs, and I found myself sitting on the edge of the bed, hands trembling as the weight of their collective longing pressed down on me. In that moment, the mirrors were no longer just glass and reflection, they were gateways, fissures in time, places where versions of myself trapped in fragments of memory reached out across the years. I wondered if they were merely echoes, or if somewhere beyond the surface, those lives still breathed, still yearned to be lived fully. The thought terrified and tempted me in equal measure. For days after, the hotel hallway became a liminal space, a corridor between what was and what could have been. I tried to resist the pull, to ignore the whispered promises of a second chance, but the reflections persisted, shifting, watching, waiting. And I realized that in their yearning, they offered me something profound, not just a glimpse into my past, but a reminder that the future was still unwritten. That amidst the fragments of my fractured self, there remained the possibility to reclaim hope, to choose differently, and perhaps, to heal. But the mirrors also held a warning: the past, once glimpsed, could consume as much as it could illuminate. And sometimes, the hardest step was not into memory, but forward into the unknown. And those lessons, painful as they were, had shaped me into someone who could still hope, still fight, and still choose. Not because I was free of regret, but because I understood its weight and refused to be crushed by it. The younger me faltered, the fire in his eyes flickering uncertainly. He took a step back, his paint-splattered hands falling to his sides like a child realizing that the world was not so simple after all. "You'll never be happy," he whispered, voice barely audible now, a challenge wrapped in sorrow. "I'm not aiming for perfect happiness," I replied softly, feeling the fragile strength of that statement. "I'm aiming for real life. Messy, uncertain, but mine." As dawn's first light crept through the curtains, the younger version of myself faded, no longer a threat, but a reminder. A fragment of the past that I carried with me, not as a chain, but as a compass. I knew then that the mirrors weren't prisons or traps. They were invitations, echoes of the selves I'd been and might still become. They challenged me to remember who I was, to reconcile the dreams I once held with the reality I had forged. And maybe, just maybe, to find a way forward that honored both. With a deep breath, I turned away from the hallway of reflections, stepping toward a future that was no longer fractured, but whole in its complexity, a future I was finally ready to live. The wood was rough and cold, the scratches deep and jagged as if clawed by unseen fingers. I pressed my ear against the face of the clock, expecting to hear the faintest tick or the faint groan of gears caught in time, but there was only silence, a silence so complete it felt like the void itself. Then the shadows moved. Not in a physical way, but like ripples in a still pond, bending and twisting at the edges of my vision. They grew more distinct, coalescing into figures that shimmered with a strange, otherworldly light, not luminous, but full of depth, as if they were trapped between the layers of this world and another. One shape stepped forward, a woman draped in old-fashioned mourning clothes, her face hidden beneath a veil that seemed woven from midnight itself. She reached out, her translucent fingers brushing the clock's pendulum, and a sound like 1,000 clocks chiming echoed faintly in the room, harmonizing with the pulse of my heartbeat. Her voice filled my mind, gentle and melancholic. "Time has forgotten us here, trapped between moments that refuse to pass. We are bound to this clock, guardians of hours lost and memories unclaimed. You hold the key to release us, but with it comes the burden of endless vigilance. I felt the weight of her words settle deep in my bones. The clock was more than a timepiece, it was a prison and a beacon, a threshold between the living and the forgotten. She beckoned me closer, her eyes reflecting centuries of longing and sorrow. To wind the clock once more would awaken the cycle anew, binding me to its ceaseless march. To leave it still meant allowing these shadows to linger in their frozen purgatory, but maybe find peace in stillness. In that moment, I understood, the grandfather clock was no mere antique. It was an altar to time's cruel mercy, a reminder that every tick carries a choice, to move forward, or to remain forever caught in the silent moments between. And I, for better or worse, had become its keeper. The room seemed to pulse with the weight of those unspoken stories, each whisper wrapping around me like a cold embrace. As I opened my eyes, the shadows softened slightly, their movements less frantic, their desperate yearning transformed into something quieter, hope. I spoke again, my voice steadier this time, I will remember you. I will carry your stories, your regrets, your love. Let that be the key to your release. A fragile stillness settled over the room, the mournful chorus fading into a gentle hum, like the ticking of a clock restarting after a long silence. The pendulum began to swing, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, cutting through the frozen dawn and pushing back the unnatural chill. The figures wavered, their features becoming clearer as if gratitude restored their form. One by one, they turned toward the light spilling through the window, their shapes dissolving like morning mist kissed by the sun. Time began to flow again. I sank to the floor, the burden of their stories resting lightly on my shoulders. The grandfather clock, once a symbol of frozen despair, now stood as a monument to remembrance and release. In accepting their stories, I became their keeper, not a prisoner, but a guardian of moments lost and found. And as the first true dawn broke over the horizon, I knew my own time had been reset, not stopped, but renewed. The gentle tick-tock echoed softly in the room, weaving through the quiet like a tender heartbeat. It was no longer just the sound of a clock keeping time, it had become a hymn to continuity, to resilience, and to the eternal passage that carries both joy and sorrow alike. I breathed in deeply, feeling the weight of those countless moments, lost, found, and remembered, settle within me. Each story, each presence, had left an indelible mark, a subtle thread connecting the past to the present, the seen to the unseen. In the stillness that followed, I felt a profound gratitude, not only for the spirits who had entrusted me with their memories but for the fragile, fleeting nature of time itself. How precious, how sacred every tick of the clock, every breath, every heartbeat, because they were our true inheritance. And so, as the dawn painted the world anew, I chose to carry their stories forward with tenderness and awareness, honoring the invisible legacies that shape us all. In this quiet understanding, I found peace, a gentle healing that rippled slowly through the chambers of my heart, inviting me to live fully, love deeply, and remember always that time, in all its mystery, is the most precious gift we hold.